So it's December, and I started thinking to myself, what kind of videos can I do this month? Something wholesome, nice, and Christmas related. But then, the more I thought about it, I'm doing a lot of Christmas videos this month, as I do every month. And for whatever reason, I started thinking about the Disney films, the ones that we all grew up with. The more I was thinking about it, they're wholesome all the time. They don't wait 1 month a year to shine all the magic and goodness of humanity on us. They have to be whimsical all year round, and that can't be easy. So I decided, screw it, I'm just gonna review all the Disney films. That is to say, all the animated 2D Disney films, with some exceptions. Why? Because I love Disney, and so do you. Oh, you may act like you don't like Disney. You may talk about how it's an evil corporate monster that only gets stronger and stronger the longer we live. But the funny thing is, you don't have a choice. You can bombard us with all the genius, monstrous things that Disney has done in the past. You can argue debatable messages. You can argue debatable ethics. You can even argue debatable stereotypes. But it doesn't matter. Disney has always been there. For most of us, it's the first thing we're introduced to. And that's the genius of Disney, putting all their time and all their effort not in something adult, but in something for children. And once something has your childhood by the balls, it's never gonna leave you. It's there forever. Disney has practically become family to us. It's fairy tales, it's magic, it's everything that we enjoyed and thought was possible when we were younger. And as we grow older, there's a lot of other things to enjoy. The artistry, the creativity, the imagination. There's literally no other word for it but Disney. It's an artistic cultural phenomenon that'll never ever leave. Now I'm just gonna state up front that I am directly ripping off Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, where James Rolfe reviews a new monster movie every day of October. I think it's a cool idea, and I wanted to do it with something I really enjoy, the hand-drawn animated Disney films. The only downside is there's only so many days in December and there's just a friggin' buttload of these movies. So I'm probably gonna do about 3 a day, and once or twice I may skip over one. But I'll do my best to comment on as many as possible. And keep in mind, this is just my own personal opinion. If you like or hate any of these films, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just putting out there what I think of some of the most beloved classics of all time. So, sit back and enjoy the month of what I like to call Disneycember. Let's start off with the very first animated film ever made, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. We often associate the Disney formula with a princess in a big castle and some sort of far-off fairy tale. And even though not all the films are like that, in fact probably not even the majority, that's the one kids seem to like the most, and it started at the very beginning. Disney knew then that the more timeless you can make something, the longer it'll be around, so logically it makes sense to start off with a fairy tale. And as a first film goes, it's pretty damn impressive. I mean, okay, it's not entirely timeless, I mean the designs are kind of 40s, some of the characters aren't as developed as children's films are today, and Snow White's singing voice is very Betty Boopish. To describe the story is almost silly. We all know it. An evil queen wants to be the quote-unquote fairest of them all, but finds out that there's only one young woman in her way, the Princess Snow White. So she sends a hunter out to kill her, but the hunter is just so blown away by how hot she is, he can't do it. So he tells her to run away, and she comes across a cottage filled with 7 dwarves, which for me as a kid always raised a lot of questions. Are the dwarves related? Are they brothers? Did they all just meet at random? If so, is there a place where dwarves just usually meet? Well, I'm overanalyzing. The queen finds out that Snow White is still alive and puts on a disguise to try and kill her. Kinda strange that she wouldn't just send a henchman or somebody else to do it. I mean, does she only have just the one? But again, overanalyzing. The film is about as basic children's movie as you can get. It's very bright, it's very colorful, but it doesn't try to insult the audience intelligence either. As Disney princesses go, Snow White is probably one of the weaker ones, as she is sort of just bland and general nice. But on the upside, she is generally nice. There's nothing really wrong with her, she's just not particularly interesting. To be fair though, she's a lot more engaging than the prince, who only gets about 3 lines, and most of them are just sung. The dwarfs, of course, is what everybody remembers. The different personalities, the different ways they're drawn, the fact that their emotional status also happens to be their names. That's what the kids enjoy. Adults can enjoy the artistry a little bit more. Not just the bright colors and pretty background, but also some of the scary images they have. While the story itself is not especially dark, it was pretty ballsy to throw in some of this really creepy imagery. The queen as a villain, when you really analyze it, is a pretty boring villain. She doesn't say much, she doesn't do much. Just a really vain woman is nothing really that fascinating in a kid's film. But what keeps her pretty enjoyable, again, is the animation. She's just drawn great. I mean, she has this permanent frown on her face. I'm trying to think if I ever saw her smile in the film. And of course, the design of her after the transformation is just awesome. It used to scare the crap out of me when I was a kid. But in general, does Snow White hold up as a film even if you emotionally disconnect it from the fact that you saw it when you were a child? Well, the key word there is emotion. Much like The Wizard of Oz or even Where the Wild Things Are, this is a film that is entirely fueled on emotion. Logic plays very little part in it. And to be honest, I find films like that very fascinating. They don't give you what you logically or ethically want to see, they give you what your emotions want to see. Like the prince comes, kisses her, and they ride off into the castle. Well, okay, how did he find her? Where did he come from? Did they ever have a conversation in the movie? Does it make sense that they would ride off together? Of course not, but that's not what your emotions want to see. They want to see the happiest of endings after the saddest and darkest of moments. Oh, yeah, don't think this scene didn't fuck me up. You can keep Bambi's mom, you can keep Simba's dad. This is the scene that rips me to shreds. Why? Because it's like a wake, literally down to the organ music. How much more depressing can you get? The dwarves aren't just crying, they are sobbing, bawling over the fact that they've lost the only woman that's ever come into their lives. So of course as a young boy, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm tough, it's just a cartoon. It ain't gonna leave an impact on me. Oh no, not Grumpy, not Grumpy, no, he was the tough one, not Grumpy, not Grumpy, no, there's no hope for humanity. Just slit your throat right now, there's no purpose in living. But that's just how the film works. It did well to help kids emotionally connect with things that we weren't often used to connecting with. And sure, she comes back to life, they live happily ever after, but we didn't know that. Even if we did, this is still a pretty sad thing to go through. For a little kid, this is pretty heavy. So, apart from it just being groundbreaking as the first animated film, I think actually it does hold up for little kids, and I'd even argue adults. Is it complex? No. Is it engaging? No. But its emotional simplicity does manage to tap into the audience, to a point where we're not even questioning the obvious logical problems that are just staring us in the face. Creating a world for us where happily ever after is okay to believe in. Like how Snow White was mostly fueled on emotions, Pinocchio is very similar. It's not even really based on a fairy tale, it's based on a book, and a very odd, deranged, dark book as well. Yeah, the movie's dark too, but good God, the book's downright sadistic. Where in a fairy tale, you just know it's sort of a magical world where magical things can happen. This world treats it a little differently. I mean, there are magical things, like the blue fairy that brings a puppet to life, but then how about the fact that there's just a fox and a cat walking around like normal people? I remember how blown away they were that they saw a puppet boy walking around, and all I could think to myself is, why isn't anybody blown away that there's a giant fox and a giant cat just walking around? Well, it's just that kind of world where things like that can happen. If there's anything Disney is good at, it's having us go along with things that don't make sense. And this movie does it pretty well. Geppetto makes a puppet boy, wishes one night that he were real, and the blue fairy comes and makes it happen. It's ironic because probably the film should be centered around Geppetto. He's the one that has a past. He's the one that actually has some character. Pinocchio is just sort of born with his personality. So the fact that he has to learn lessons and be given a conscience is kind of strange because the Blue Fairy just sort of made him up, didn't she? If you want him to learn lessons, why didn't you just have it where the lessons were already learned? But again, I'm totally overanalyzing this. Pinocchio comes across a bunch of strange adventures and learns a bunch of lessons along the way. And the visuals they use to have him learn these lessons sticks with us even today. The nose growing longer when you're lying, turning into a donkey when you've been bad. You don't forget strangeness like this that often. Pinocchio is a pretty likable character, and I like the fact that they do make him, for lack of a better term, a real boy. He isn't just pitch perfect, he is gullible. He does want to do bad things sometimes. It doesn't mean he's a rotten kid, it just means he's a kid. What sets him apart though is that he does learn his lesson and he does try to do better. He has a conscience named Jiminy Cricket, who I'm just gonna say out there, I never enjoyed, even as a kid. Yeah, I know that means I have no heart and I'm going to hell or whatever you want to say, but I just don't like this guy. I just didn't find that charming, I didn't find him that funny, his voice sort of grated on me, but he sings that one song and everybody's putty in his hands. I don't know, I was always waiting for Pinocchio to step on him. Again, the creepy imagery is sort of upped in this movie, much like it was in Snow White. Except this time, instead of everything always turning out okay, this time it wasn't always okay. A bunch of misbehaving boys are brought to an amusement park and then turned into donkeys where they're gonna be used in mining shafts. And that's it! You never see them again! The guy running the place is never defeated, the boys can't talk anymore. God knows what they're doing with the ones who can. It's pretty friggin' grim as kids' films go. The rest, however, does come back to the typical Disney formula. After a relatively exciting climax, Pinocchio gets smashed into a bunch of rocks and loses his life. Again, he can spin his head around, but some rocks kills him. I don't know. But the blue fairy comes back and sees his sacrifice and brings him back. Everybody in the audience is filled with joy, and of course Jiminy Cricket sings that song that nowadays is almost causing some controversy. Okay, not major controversy, but people have been debating whether or not this is a good message. This is the song that Disney used all the time. It's practically their biggest trademark. But some people think that it just promotes laziness, or a lying belief that everything will be okay if you just believe hard enough. While you could make that argument, I have yet to see a kid that totally fell for this. Or even more depressing, an adult. I think kids are smarter than we give them credit for. Kids are always going to be aware that there's bad things in the world. There's things they're going to be afraid of. And that closing their eyes and wishing isn't always going to solve their problem. I think most people connect to it because it's a symbol of hope rather than realistic planning. That sometimes unexpected good things can happen, and they can come out of nowhere. They can come when you least suspect it, so never give up the idea that all hope is gone. I don't know, that's what I got out of it, and I think that's what most people get out of it. And I think that's what most people get out of the film as well. It runs the Disney gamut that most of us enjoy. At times bright and colorful, but at other times dark and scary. Threatening and doubtful, but always with that ray of hope that sees us through. Doesn't always make a whole lot of sense, but they create a world where it doesn't need to. It's a world where anything can happen, even when you least suspect it. Riding high with the success of Snow White and Pinocchio, it's interesting that Disney decided to do something 100% different for their third film. Fantasia doesn't have a narrative story. Hell, it doesn't even have any dialogue apart from the host. It's just an experiment of taking classical music and combining it with great Disney animation. It's not one story, it's several stories. And half the time, they're not even really stories. The opening is just a collection of abstract imagery that goes along with the music, like what your mind might be thinking when hearing it for the first time. And I friggin' love it. It's not just one of my favorite Disney films, it's one of my favorite films, period. Remember what I was saying before about emotional simplicity? You could argue that this is the film that masters it. Whereas I describe both Snow White and Pinocchio as emotional stories, this is what I like to call an emotional experience. It's not based on narrative as much as moments. And life is made up of very unique moments, so I don't think there's really any problem in putting them together in a movie. Especially if they do get an emotional response. Sometimes it creates a confusing response, like the one with the dinosaurs. I never know how to feel watching that. Sometimes they're threatening, sometimes they're cute, and then through the course of the piece, they're just gone. I remember as a kid, I had no idea what to think of that. It's just sort of something that happened and you draw your own conclusions. Some definitely do have a flowing narrative, like the most famous one, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. This is actually how the film came about. Disney just wanted to make this short with Mickey Mouse as a magician. But as the expenses for it got bigger and bigger, they finally just shrugged and said, hey, why don't we do a couple of these and just turn it into a flick? The result is some booming, fantastic music with some booming, fantastic animation. I think sometimes just the falling of leaves can be so much more powerful than the emotional conflict that a character is going through. If the film is done right, it can suck you into something so simple and yet so oddly profound. And Disney animators were great at that. They could find the ballet, the movement, the music, anything that was poetic in, well, really anything. Even just the changing of seasons. I stated this before, but my absolute favorite is the ending. Both The Night on Bald Mountain and the Ave Maria. Even if you don't have a religious background, just the very basic emotional levels they have here are really high. The contrast in putting these two together is just brilliant, and the belief in something much darker than you can imagine, or more inspiring than you can imagine, is definitely there. Disney wanted to do a lot more of these and have this be a continuing film series. But sadly, the film didn't make the money that it needed. Oh, it made a lot of money. It was like the second or third highest grossing film that year, but it didn't matter. The film cost a fortune to make, and financially, it just didn't make sense to make anymore. They did make one sequel years later, though we'll get to that when we come around to it. For this film, though, Fantasia is a powerhouse of art. In fact, it's actually like going to an art museum, except with motion and music. As you can imagine, though, it's not as geared for kids as the other Disney flicks. There's nothing really troubling or bad about it that kids can't watch. I remember watching Bald Mountain Find when I was younger. But with the exception of maybe Sorcerer's Apprentice, there's nothing here that's immediately geared towards them. This was the animated Disney film almost strictly for adults. And while kids could watch it, it wasn't exactly their film. It was more for the grown-ups, and those who love it, really love it. And it's it still continues to be one of my faves. Fantasia gave a disappointing turnout at the box office, it seemed Disney had to go back to the traditional narrative. Dumbo was the 4th film they ever released. It's a curious choice because while it is artistically interesting at times, it's not anything really groundbreaking. Snow White, Pinocchio, and Fantasia you could definitely argue broke some new ground. Dumbo is just sort of your typical kids flick, but it's not bad. Actually, something I always noticed about Dumbo is that Dumbo is never actually the focus. He doesn't even talk, he just sort of walks around looking cute. I mean, it works, he's big-eyed, curious, and all those other things you expect out of Disney characters. But the focus of the movie is the rest of the world. The world of the circus, the world of the animals, the world of getting drunk. It's all about strange visuals. He's very much the observer, not the focus. But hey, that's fine by me. I love weird imagery, especially if it's brought to us by Disney. The story is very basic. An elephant gives birth to a little elephant that's born with big ears. He's considered an outcast and often gets into trouble for it. While one kid goes too far in making fun of him, the mother takes the guy and starts beating the crap out of him. Thus she gets thrown away in the cellar and Dumbo is left on his own, just with one little friend, a circus mouse. The rest of the movie is just things going wrong, weird people and weird things approaching him, and Dumbo looking confused. Again, I don't have a problem with it if it's done well. It's done reasonably well. It's just a weird, strange environment that they built for him. It's funny because most posters show Dumbo flying, but really he doesn't fly until the last 10 minutes. It just proves to be your basic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer story, but it works well enough. Like I said, the weird angles and often bizarre tone really help to give the film a very interesting identity, and actually sort of sets it apart from the other Disney films. Now there is big debate about whether or not the crows in this movie are racist. Obviously they're all played by black actors, and they do use slang and say the word brother every once in a while. But Disney never pulled it like they did Song of the South or some of the other racially sensitive cartoons. And from the standpoint of just a dumb white kid, I thought they were cool. They had style, they had class. They're the ones that made Dumbo fly. What's not to like? They're friggin' awesome. Now again, I'm speaking as a dumb white kid. Maybe there's something there I'm missing, but for me personally, I never saw the problem. The pink elephant scene, though entirely pointless, is friggin' awesome. I loved this scene as a kid, I love it now. It's weird, it's strange, it's kind of dark, it's almost creepy, but it's also very enjoyable. The animation is flowing, the weird designs they come up with are just surreal. It's just pure craziness. And yeah, there's really no point to it, but I friggin' love it. They do have some emotional scenes too. The scene where Dumbo hugs his mother is one of those big tearjerkers that every girl I know always goes nuts whenever they see. And like I said before, the world they create for Dumbo is always big, massive, and threatening. So when you get to the happy-pappy points, it's all the more enjoyable. Overall, Dumbo's a decent movie. It's not up to par with some of the more traditional Disney films, but I don't think it was meant to be. It sort of set its own rules and it stuck with it. And I think it's pretty awesome for that. It's a fun film with some fun sequences. Well, I can't talk about this movie unless I show this clip. There's really no point in hiding it. We all know what happens to Bambi's mom in this movie. And it messed up so many kids for life. But is that the only reason to enjoy Bambi? The answer is obviously no. Not only is the art in this movie just fantastic, I mean, good God, you just feel like you're in nature throughout this entire film. But it's the first time Disney's ever done a coming-to-age story. And it does it very well. Where Disney's always been good at creating villains and threatening obstacles to go up against, they knew to keep that to a minimum in this movie. The villain is man, and you never see him. But just the mere threat of him is enough to be intimidating. Everybody talks about the mother's death, but some of these other scenes can get pretty damn intense. Like most of the early Disney films, it mixes bright and colorful with dark and mommy killing. But let's be honest, it's not the death of the mother that gets us, it's the fact that there was such a strong connection between her and the son. That's why it messes us up. And I also like the fact that the father is almost never around, and when he is, Bambi's almost afraid of him. Sort of a fascinating dysfunctional family that may or may not need to be, but again, that's sort of up for debate, and that's one of the reasons I do like this film so much. The answers are not clear-cut. Hell, even the questions aren't clear-cut. It's just the life of this deer. And all those typical children's cliches that you see in other kids' films, oh hell, you see in other adult films for that matter, are not here. And thank God, because you know what? This is enough. Sometimes just showing someone or something live their life is all you need. Life is interesting. Life has problems. Life doesn't always resolve itself in a clever and poetic way. Life doesn't always have heroes. Life doesn't always have villains. So because of that, as you'd imagine, there's less of an emphasis on story and more on character. And while Bambi is not the most fascinating of characters, he's supposed to be sort of the every guy. He's the blank slate that's supposed to absorb love, fear, sadness, happiness, and whatever other emotions you can connect with. I'd be lying if I said I watched this one a lot. In fact, it's probably one of the Disney films I watched the least, though I do own it. But I definitely respect it more than I do view it. I guess there's only so many cutesy-wootsy scenes I can sit through, but they are done well, and with purpose. The second half is actually where I start to get more interested. I mean, you know, after that scene. I like seeing Bambi grow up, I like seeing what he's become, and I like seeing what he's going to make of himself. It's another one of those films where the lack of really complex characters is made up for in how much complexity they put into the backgrounds and the colors. Half the time the sceneries give you the emotions, and I like a film that can do that without cheating on the character necessarily. The emotions are there in the character, they're just emphasized by the surroundings. And Bambi is chock full of that. Heavy atmosphere in a heavy environment. It's easily one of Disney's finest. I'll be honest, when I was looking through the list of Disney animated films and I came across Saludos Amigos, I never even heard of it. I thought I knew most of the Disney hand-drawn films, but this one totally slipped my mind. And to be fair, there's kind of a good reason. It's not very long, I don't even think it's really a full-length motion picture. I think it's about 40 minutes. And on top of that, it's just sort of a weird premise. A bunch of the Disney animators decide to fly to places like Brazil and Titicaca and so forth to give them inspiration for their cartoons. And that's it. It's literally just the animators going around doing drawings and then showing you the cartoon they came up with. Does that really count as a movie? I don't know, I can see that much more as a featurette or a making of or a behind the scenes bit, but as a movie, it's not very interesting. Maybe if we got to know the animators a little more or it was shot a little better, but as is, it just sort of looks like someone's vacation videos with just cartoons thrown in. The only cool thing about it is that you do get a little bit of culture, and that's always nice. They show you what different words mean, they show you different parts of their land, so at least you are getting a little bit of an education out of it. But even the animation is just their normal cartoon animation. I love the cartoon animation, but to see an entire movie like that, well heck, not even an entire movie, 40 minutes, heck, even the 40 minutes isn't entirely animated, it seems like kind of a letdown. I don't know, I'm not sure how to judge it seeing how it's not even motion picture length. But I often see it on the list of animated Disney films, so I guess I'll include it here. And actually, this is the birthplace of that one green parrot. I think most people think he came from Three Caballeros, but nope, this is actually where he was born. I guess that's kinda neat. The only bit I remember really enjoying was when they were singing the song Brazil, and you see this paintbrush go through and actually paint Brazil. This is awesome Disney doing what awesome Disney does, taking shapes and colors and playing with it. You think you're looking at a tree, but maybe you're looking at a bird. You think it's a bunch of bananas, but with a splash of black, you're looking at toucans. Stuff like that is great, and if the rest of the film was like that, maybe I'd enjoy it more. But as is, it's pretty forgettable. It might be good to put on just as a time waster for your kids, and like I said, it does have a little bit of culture in it. But as a movie, it's not that groundbreaking. If you just want to say you've seen them all, go check it out, but aside from that, I'd say it's probably a decent one to skip. Three Caballeros is probably much better known than Saludos Amigos, but to be fair, they're not that much different. True, in comparing the two, there does seem to be a lot more passion thrown into this one. It's longer, there's more energy, and as far as their basic cartoon animation goes, this is some of their best. I mean, the motion and the line work just leaps off the screen sometimes. Look at how fast they're going. Much like Saludos Amigos, there isn't really a story. Or, well, in about as much as it's just Donald opening some presents. Yeah, that's the story. Isn't that riveting? He gets a package on his birthday, which it turns out is Friday the 13th, bet you didn't know that. And each present, it turns out, is a presentation on some place he's never been to before. And like the last film, there's shorts, there's songs, there's Donald Duck acting like Donald Duck. And at first I was kind of getting into it. I was kind of enjoying all the randomness mixed in with the music and, like I said, that really fast-paced animation. And the stories were a lot more memorable too. There's one about a penguin trying to get to warmer climate, another one about a burro who can fly. But then the stories sort of stop and we get that green parrot again. Him and Donald look around Brazil a bit, they dance, they sing, they have fun, I guess. And then he opens the last package and we have that woodpecker thing? I'm not sure what he is. But he comes out to sing about Mexico. And literally, the last third of this movie is just Donald trying to get laid. Every time you see him, he's fawning over a woman, or women, and just trying to get somebody to tickle his tail feathers. 2/3 of the movie is pretty much like just being at a party. Which at first sounds awesome, but at some point you kind of want to leave that party and find something else, or talk to somebody, or take a breather, or I don't know, but there's only so long you can do it. And that's the problem with this film. After a while, it gets tiring. The animation continues to impress, as well as some really good live-action mixing. But you're just sort of watching people dance most of the time. And for a few minutes it's fine, but for a whole second half of a movie, it gets pretty old pretty fast. Then we just cut to the three of them acting goofy in abstract land again. They jump around, shoot some guns, fire off some fireworks, and that's it! That's the movie! Fun? There's a lot of things I really like about this film. I like a lot of the scenes, I like a lot of the animations and the short stories, which is why I hate it so much when I see it all together, because it suddenly becomes boring. This is one of those movies where on the Disney Channel they would chop it up and they would just show it as little shorts on their cartoon shows. And that's really where it belongs. I can't see this really functioning as a film. Maybe if they went for more of a Cirque du Soleil thing or kept a little bit more focus, or even lack of focus, just something that went all the way. Here, it seems like they kind of want to do short stories, and now they kind of want to do it as one long party, and now they kind of want to make it educational, but now they kind of want to make it silly. The only thing that's consistently good, as I said before, is the animation, which is really stylized and fun. But for me, I don't think that holds the film. If you want to see it just for the motion and the cool drawings, I'd say maybe check it out. But even then, that's a big maybe. There's other Disney films that do animation better, and they have good story and characters to go along with it, so I'd probably just recommend those. But if you're curious enough, it does have some good moments. Take that for what it's worth. It's ironic that Disney decided not to do any more of the Fantasia series, because for the next couple of films, they'd be trying endlessly to try and recreate it. Make My Music was probably the first attempt to try and do that. It follows sort of a similar formula to what Three Caballeros was doing, just tying together a series of shorts with a certain kind of music. Although in Three Caballeros, where they had a character at least tying the stories together, though loosely, this one, they just show the shorts. Again, much like Fantasia. Except the music isn't classical music, it's more music that was popular at the time. In fact, some of it, if I understand correctly, was left over from Fantasia. The animation for Blue Bayou actually makes it into this one, which was originally supposed to be featured in a sequel to Fantasia, except instead of using the classical music, they used a song instead. Later, the original would be released on DVD, and it's a lot better. Make My Music is probably closer to what Three Caballeros was trying to be. Sort of a fun series of short stories that are very loosely tied together with one theme. In this one, you guessed it, it's music. Though some classical does make it in, for example, we do have Peter and the Wolf, though it does have a narrator as well, but it works okay. We also have a short that really seems to have nothing to do with music. Remember the cartoon Mighty Casey Up to Bat? Yeah, it's from this. It's a great story and it's hilarious, but what's it have to do with music? Is talking and rhyming really the same? Well, however you want to take it, it's still great to watch. Here the short stories work a lot better. Some just create atmosphere, others tell a full narrative, and they're all pretty solid. I can't think of any part I particularly didn't like. Favorite moments include Casey, again Peter and the Wolf, but by far my favorite is the singing whale, with all the singing voices done by one person throughout the entire thing. That is awesome. I know a lot of people probably haven't seen this cartoon, so without giving anything away, let's just say that sad face, yeah, big clue. It's another one of those bittersweet moments that probably leaves a few kids confused, but I like that. It wasn't totally sad, but it's definitely not happy either. And on top of that, you're getting some great music. And one hell of a great singer. Modern to classic to jazz, they cover a pretty impressive gambit. And while nothing hits quite as potent as Fantasia does, it is still pretty enjoyable. This is another example of a bunch of cartoons that were taken from this movie and then chopped up into shorts, and there's a reason. They work really well. So, if you ever want to see them all together, check this movie out. It's a good one. Fun and fancy-free. Only one thing could be gayer than that title. And there he is. Yeah, as I said before, I'm not a huge fan of Jiminy Cricket, but luckily he doesn't have that much to do in this. Just like the other films, there's no one story, but in this there's not really a bunch of them either. There's only two. And Jiminy Cricket, for whatever reason, hosts them. It's strange that they would actually call this movie fun and fancy-free instead of just the two titles. It's not like Make Mine Music where if you listed all the titles there wouldn't be enough room. Here there's only two, Bongo and Jack and the Beanstalk. Heck, that's a shorter title than Ichabod and Mr. Toad. They could have done it. But heck with that, how do the stories hold up? Well, as the other Disney stories go, even for the short ones, it's nothing that special. They're okay though. The first one is called Bongo, and it's about a bear who used to work in the circus but escapes to live in the wild. He finds he doesn't quite fit in, but things change when he comes across a female bear. But then he gets confused when she starts beating the shit out of him. But then the movie so colorfully tells us that the way bears show that they love each other is beating the shit out of each other. Makes sense to me. Yeah, even as a kid I thought that was a little weird, and I'm still not sure I buy it now, but it makes for a cute song. And that's the best way to describe the first short. Cute. I really liked it as a kid, but looking back, it does go on a little too long. If they were gonna do this and make it work, they should either make it its own movie with much more characters, or make it a lot shorter. Then there's a really weird transition where Jiminy Cricket is somehow invited to a party. A party where puppets come to life and strange, creepy men do weird sounds with their hands. And the parents are nowhere to be seen. Yeah, this would not fly today.
You know, Ophelia, you look so sweet.
What'd you say?
I say, I think you look so sweet.
Yes.
But that segues into Jack and the Beanstalk, the first appearance of Mickey Mouse in any movie since Fantasia. And believe it or not, the last time you'll ever hear Walt Disney do his voice. We also get Goofy and Donald into the mix, as it's pretty much just the straightforward story of Jack and the Beanstalk, not really any major differences. I say the only thing that really stands out about it is the giant, who is sort of this enjoyable doofus. And they added this really weird plot device where he could change into anything. Isn't that strange? He's already a giant, why do you have to give him more magical stuff? Being a giant's enough. On top of that, they don't really do anything with it. There's a whole chase scene at the end where he's trying to get him, but wouldn't it just make more sense if he turned into a cheetah or something? The film doesn't quite have the flow or creativity that Make Mine Music had. And to be honest, I don't know what the connection is with all these things. You have Jiminy Cricket, then a bear from a circus into the wild, then a creepy man with puppets, and then Jack and the Beanstalk. How's it all tied together? Individually, they work okay, as cartoons, but I don't think there's enough of them to really warrant a film. Or if they did pick two, they'd have to do ones that are particularly unique or particularly cinematic, and neither of these really aren't. Again, they're not bad, they're just not anything that special. But they have their own charm and likability to them, so I guess they work out. I'd say it's probably better just to rent them individually and skip the middle parts, but that's just me. If it looks good to you, you'll probably like it. Now we have Melody Time, which is so similar to Make Mine Music that actually I'm sort of wondering why they didn't just call it Make Mine Music 2. I mean, it's almost identical. Different variations of songs, most of them modern, sung by modern singers, a little bit of poetry thrown in, and even some straightforward stories. It's pretty much the exact same thing. And just like Make Mine Music, this one works pretty good too. You do have your straightforward narratives, some of them more forgettable than others, but you also have your selections of straightforward music and even sometimes even straightforward poetry. The poem As Lovely as a Tree segment is especially nice. It's just the Disney animators drawing what they hear as the poem is read, with some nice soothing music thrown over it. It works pretty well. There's also a really cool section called Bumble Boogie, which reminds me a lot of the Pink Elephant sequence. It's just a bee flying around to a whacked out version of Flight of the Bumblebee as the music is literally trying to destroy him. It's really chaotic, at least to some fun imagery. The one that probably stands out the most is the Johnny Appleseed one. When I was a kid, I really liked it. When I was a teenager, I got a little bit more cynical and started making fun of it. Now that I'm older, I actually find myself really liking it again. It's got some real heavy atmosphere, some real heavy visuals. And some of those backgrounds are just incredible. Yeah, it's still a little corny and I do make fun of it sometimes, but it still holds up. It's the size and scope that they give something that seems so relatively simple, and yet they show that it took so much dedication. That image of the apple trees becoming the clouds is one of the most surreal things I've ever seen. I remember it even stayed in my mind as a little kid, and it really, really is gripping. In fact, it's so good, it probably could have been its own movie. I'm sort of wondering why they tucked it away in here. And then the last segment they end on is Pecos Bill, sung through a lot of folk and country music. This is also fun too and really creative, but again, why did they end the film on this? I mean, it's funny, it's enjoyable, and it's catchy, but dude, did you see the Appleseed one? I mean, that was far superior. Pecos Bill just ends on a, God, I don't even know what note. I'm not sure if it's sad, I'm not sure if it's happy, it's just kind of odd. Like I said, I don't have a problem with it, I just don't know why they closed on it. But either way, Melody Time has some really good shorts in it, as well as some good music and really great animation. The atmosphere is really heavy in this one. Again, maybe not Fantasia heavy, but there are points where it hits that traditional Disney charm that only Disney can have. And they recreate it quite well here. Melody Time is definitely one to check out. So we went from a bunch of shorts to just 2, to a bunch of shorts to just 2 again. Only this time there was a feeling that the stories they picked were much more out of the norm. These weren't really fairy tale, they were sort of classic stories. Both had their funny upbeat moments, but both had this very underlining dark tone throughout the whole thing. Even the setting for the narrators is a little off. It's just this dark, dark library. You don't even see the narrator. It's just these books sort of floating in the stained glass window with a candle in it. When I was a kid, I loved it. As an adult, I still love it. But heck, let's talk about them individually. You got The Wind in the Willows, which, when you get down to it, is another very strange book. Not that animals are walking and talking, that's not the weird part. It's the fact that everybody else in the world is human. And not just that, they're to scale. The rat is literally the size of a rat. That just looks so odd. But the rest of the story seems to follow pretty closely to the book. You got Toad, who's an extremist with anything. Anything that's new, anything that's hot, he's all over it. Mania, as the Brits like to call it. And he suddenly gets obsessed with motor cars. So he makes a really stupid deal with a guy named Weepy who, I don't know, I'm sure is some sort of ethnic stereotype. In that he hands over Toad Hull in exchange for the car. But in court, Weepy tells a different story and says that Toad stole the car, which gets him thrown in jail and only his friends are able to save him. Molly and Rat are a lot of fun, Toad is enjoyably crazy, and even that horse gets a few good one-liners. Next you have The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which in terms of story layout, even to the original book, is so odd to me, but I really love it because of that. Most of the short is just Ichabod Crane and how he interacts with the people in the town. He has a bully, he has a girlfriend, there's a little bit of a love triangle, and most of it is done through mime. You have Bing Crosby narrating it, but for the most part, people don't really talk. And yet so much character still comes out of them. Including the fact that, something I never noticed as a kid, Ichabod is kind of a dick. I mean, when you look at what he wants to do, he wants to marry this woman and mainly get her money. I mean, he's already fantasizing her father being out of the picture. I think a lot of people, when they look back, think of Ichabod Crane as just this innocent that gets killed by the Headless Horseman. But no, he was actually sort of a bastard. Which for Disney is kind of interesting. It's one of the few times where you actually have sort of a jerk be your lead. In fact, you could make the argument that Brom Bones, though he's a bit of a bully, is much more of a good guy. I mean, he doesn't do anything really wrong, or at least not as wrong as Ichabod. And for all we know, maybe he'd make a better boyfriend, who knows? But of course the part everyone remembers is the built-up appearance of the Headless Horseman. My God, that laugh is cool. I think it's one of those rare times that a lot of kids found themselves both scared and laughing at the same time. The climax is a lot of fun that way. It's sort of like Evil Dead 2. In fact, I'd be shocked if director Sam Raimi didn't take a lot of the atmosphere and tone directly from this cartoon. It's just your classic ghost story with a classic ghost story ending. And the two seem to go actually pretty well together. Both take advantage of the fact that it's cinematic and they can get a lot of fun angles, and they also stick true to their stories, as well as taking some creative liberties. Whenever anyone thinks Wind in the Willow or Sleepy Hollow, these are usually the first two versions that come in mind, and that's probably not so bad. It's good to read the originals, of course, but these are pretty good adaptations. It's heavy on the dark, but also big on the laughs. Either one is great on its own, but back to back, they work just as good. Cinderella, every little girl's dream come true. After 6 films of not having a continuing story run all the way through, this was finally a return to the 3-act structure. Cinderella, the famous fairy tale, tells the story of a young woman who's been turned into a maid by her stepmother and her evil stepsisters. Her bunch of animal friends help her out, of course, and try to keep things jolly. But when the night of the ball approaches and she isn't able to go, her fairy godmother appears and gives her a dress and carriage to make it out there. I guess by this point it was trying to return to the roots of Snow White. You got the pretty damsel, you have the animal sidekicks, they have a softer, more realistic human being as the main star as opposed to a cuddly animal. And of course you have the evil, terrifying villains. I guess Cinderella is one of those that gets harped on a lot for being very anti-feminist. Just wait around, wish, and your dreams will come true. First of all, didn't Pinocchio start that? And second, I don't know, from a male point of view growing up, I never thought she was that bad. I always saw a lot of patience with her. I mean, yeah, I guess she never really did anything, but at the same time, the fact that she was willing to put up with so much and yet still find some happiness in her everyday life, there's gotta be some really good values in there. As a character, there isn't really too much else to her, but to be honest, the virtues I listed before, I think those are enough. The villain is great. I love that by simply having control over one person's life, this can be one of the great Disney baddies. The way she's animated, the way she stares, the way she smiles, she's a great one. The songs, of course, everybody knows, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo and so forth. And the animation is sort of a nice return to those softer colors that were made popular in Snow White and Fantasia. One of my main problems again, though, is the prince. God, does he even get a line in this movie? His dad actually has more dialogue. In fact, the movie is much more about the dad wanting him to fall in love than him actually wanting to fall in love. Maybe taking an angle from the prince's point of view might have been more interesting. But maybe if you did, you'd see just how really twisted and kind of sick this story is. Hey, he found a woman strictly based on sight. Hey, he knew her for a few hours and then he decided she's the one. Hey, all she left is a shoe, and yet somehow that's gonna determine which woman you're going to marry. Hey, coincidentally the shoe size can only fit one friggin' woman in the entire world, and thank God it just happened to be the one you fell in love with. Yeah, I guess that is a little screwed up. As the Disney films go, especially the ones that sort of use the traditional princessy formula, this one's okay. It's got some really good moments, some really good song sequences, and like I said, a really cool villain. But a lot of it also seems like filler. Just the animals sort of walking around, being goofy, having fun, when really you could have been spending that time developing some of the other characters, like, oh, I don't know, again, the friggin' prince! But the artwork is pretty impressive too. Watching it again, I really like the scale that they give a lot of these houses and castles. They actually do make it seem rather massive. And this is before widescreen. It's the basic return to the classic fairy tale, and it does it pretty decently. And any problems it does have story-wise, I think you can attribute to just the time period and, well, the fact that it is a fairy tale. Well, a lot of them were just sort of written this way. I think it holds up okay. Not one of my personal favorites, but it's definitely pretty good. Whenever people hear the title Alice in Wonderland, usually the first thing they think of is the Disney version. And yeah, actually that's not such a bad version to think of. The story about a young girl who finds herself trapped in a very strange, mysterious land is much more based on the journey than finding twists or turns. The character of Alice is a bit of a blank slate. She's the normal person that's supposed to play off all the weird, strange things that she comes across. It plays very much like a road trip movie. You come across something strange, you have an encounter with it, and then you move on to the next strange thing. Like I said, the focus is not the twists and turns, but all the oddities that she comes across. It's like Dante's Inferno, it's more a study of what you're seeing than what you're experiencing. But with that said, the girl that got to play Alice is actually pretty good. Her name's Catherine Beaumont, and she does a really good job actually giving some character to this person. The dialogue from Alice in Wonderland is not easy to recite and it's not easy to make casual, but she does a pretty good job. She's curious, she's polite, she's nice, but can be pushed to her limits. She tries to join in the fun, but often just finds herself too frustrated. And she's also very logical, which makes a lot of sense in a story like this because this is a world where logic almost has no place. My favorite characters are your favorite characters. I love the Mad Hatter, I love the March Hare, I love the Cheshire Cat. They're all absolutely crazy, but at the same time I think the fun with them is that you never know if they're threatening or not. Their mood swings are just so fast and you never know if something really dangerous is gonna happen or if they're just playing along. Half the time I don't even think they know. The Queen is one of my favorite funny villains. Actually, watching her again, I realized I actually did take a lot of the Nostalgia Critic from this character. Just how quickly she can turn from calm and collected to just screaming like a little child. Silence! I really do love pathetic, whiny brats in a grown-up body, but somehow have a ton of power. And I love watching Alice trying to figure out what's the right thing to say and right thing to do because she knows that any second her head could be gone. And actually, that's a pretty dark aspect to the story, isn't it? How many characters do actually get their heads chopped off in this movie? Just because they don't show it doesn't mean it isn't happening. It's pretty grim. Wonderland itself is very different from other interpretations. It doesn't have a bright, colorful background, it's very black. Most of the backgrounds are black. But that's always great because when color does come in, it's always bright, it's always clashing, and it always pops. Some people have problems that they cut out too much from the original books, and, well, it's a Disney film, and an animated one at that. You sort of have to get whatever you're given. I will say, with all the forced Disney sequels out there, how come this never got one? There is literally a sequel book to Alice in Wonderland. Why didn't they just change things around a bit and start putting in some of the other characters? Like the knight, the turtle, the griffin. There's a ton of areas you could go with this. But oh well. What I do like about Alice in Wonderland is that it does make the transition into movie form. That's the trap I think a lot of other movie versions fall into, is that they try to follow the book a little too closely. Ironically, with the Tim Burton one, I don't think they followed it enough, but I've complained about that enough before. Alice in Wonderland is creative, it looks great, it's a wonderful journey movie, and the majority of it works because the main character is just so likable. I have very few complaints about it, except honestly, I would have liked to have seen more. But I guess that's a good complaint to have. If you're looking for a movie that's big on story, surprises, and character development, this is probably not the place to look. But I think most people going into Alice in Wonderland know what they're gonna get. And in my opinion, this is one of the better versions. Said that Peter Pan was sort of like every little boy's fantasy. I mean, think about it. You got pirates, you got flying, you got Indians, you got faraway lands, you got mermaids. If somehow they worked in cowboys and spacemen, this movie would be set. And for what the story is, Disney does it pretty well. They of course put some changes here and there, but they still get the characteristics of these people down really great. Pan himself is very cocky and sure of himself, and I have to admit he is a little bit a product of the times. Something about that voice and the way he looks, you can definitely tell it was done in the 50s.
Of course! That's why I like him. I tell him to the Lost Boys.
But he never uses any current catchphrases or anything. Wendy, once again, is portrayed by Catherine Beaumont. Again, sort of taking your bland, typical innocent and turning into something really entertaining. I'm kind of surprised they didn't use her in more films after this. You got John the geek and Michael the cute innocent, and they all go off on an adventure to Never Never Land, where they never have to grow up. The Lost Boys are typical delinquents and the pirates are typical pirates, but what I really love about this movie is Captain Hook. Again, this is sort of the Captain Hook most people think of when they think of Peter Pan. Threatening, but he's also really, really funny. Smee as well is sort of the definitive Smee. He wants to be mean-spirited, but he's just too bumbling and nice. Plus, when you put the two of them together with the crocodile, dude, this is some of the best slapstick you'll ever see. The timing, the pacing, the expressions, it kills me every single time I watch these scenes. The romance between Wendy and Peter is just perfect. It's not overdone, they never actually share a kiss on screen. It's very much done like how real little kids fall in love. Girl often wants it more and the boy doesn't know what the hell to think of it. Tinkerbell is a nice, bitchy character that also gets her redemption at the end. And the Indians, they're definitely an archetype of what we thought Native Americans were at that point. But I don't know, it's sort of like the Black Crows from Dumbo. I thought they were cool. Peter Pan seems to get the childlike adventure down pretty well. For little kids, it's pretty gender neutral. The girls can get into the romance and the mermaids and the flying and such, while the boys can get into the sword fighting, the pirates, and all that good stuff. The energy is great, the imagination is great, it's just a good old-fashioned fun kids movie. It's definitely one of Disney's most biggest trademarks for a reason. Tramp was one of the first movies I ever saw in theaters, so naturally I loved it when I was a little kid. The story of an upper-class female dog that comes across a low-down, scroungy male dog is about as typical as it gets. At first they don't like each other, but a few situations force them together, and as they get to hang out more, they really decide that they're meant for each other. There's some differences to this usual story that I like the fact that I enjoy when they first see each other, it's not love at first sight like so many other Disney films. If anything, he just sees her in passing and just strikes up a conversation. It's not even a pleasant conversation. He's talking about how a baby's gonna take over her life and that she's never gonna be the center of attention anymore. And then he just leaves. Honestly, if you didn't know the story going in, you probably wouldn't have guessed they'd be together by the end. I sort of like that. There's also a bunch of clever little touches too, like I enjoy how the dogs interpret everything. Like how the main character thinks that the name of her owners are Jim Dear and Darling. Simply because that's what they call each other all the time.
Oh, darling.
In the kitchen, Jim dear.
As Disney films go, it's cute. Nothing that spectacular. It keeps your interest, you want to know what's gonna happen, but there's no real big surprises or any phenomenal bits of animation or, well, just anything that really stands out that much. But for what it is, it's a decent film. It did give us that great Siamese song, though. I don't know, is that racist? Now, too? I'm not sure. But it's the one song everybody hums when they're leaving the theater, so that's gotta count for something.
We are Siamese, if you please.
It is nice that they don't go for a straight-up villain in the movie or any of those forced story cliches. Well, except maybe one or two. But they're pretty downplayed. The movie is pretty much just a series of moments. But they're nice moments, and I don't recall them ever being really boring. So overall, I think it's okay. I don't think it's one I'll be watching over and over like the other Disney films, but it holds up decent. If you're a dog lover, or if even not, check it out. It's worth an hour and a half of your time. Sleeping Beauty. This movie always astounds me in what a colossal epic and what a colossal mess it is, both at the same time. First, let's look at the good stuff. The artwork, for example, is a very different take for Disney. The backgrounds never look three-dimensional, but they're not supposed to. It's supposed to be very much like tapestry work, or like paintings you'd see in a medieval castle. It was a very different approach, and it looks very nice, though I guess at times it can be a little distracting for some viewers. I personally don't mind, though. Let's also look at the side characters. The fairies are great. They have to hide the Princess Aurora for 16 years to keep her away from the evil of Maleficent, who again is freaking great. I mean, one of the best villains. Top 3 easily. It's a villain that's evolved almost entirely from the voice acting and the animation. Because to be fair, her motivation's not very strong. She gets snubbed at a party, that's it. But the extremes she'll go to get revenge, now that's friggin' awesome. She's classy, she's despicable, she's quiet, she's loud, she's subtle, she's over the top. She's everything you want in a villain. She can wave her hand to make something move, or she can turn into a fire-breathing dragon. Friggin' awesome. The music is also fantastic, taken from one of the best-known ballets under the same name. It leads to some memorable songs as well as some great climax music. In fact, the climax itself is one of Disney's best. The energy, the animation, everything that goes into it is just fiery blaze. It's always the best part of the movie every time I watch it. Now let's get to the stuff that doesn't work, like the main characters. Good God, are they boring. When I think of the stereotypical boring princess, this is who I think of. She does nothing, she has little to no character, she just sort of sings and looks pretty. I don't even think she's that pretty. But how about the prince? He's the dashing hero in the end. Surely he must be interesting, right? Actually, he's even more boring. Do you realize that the last line he says in this movie is "Goodbye, father," and that's about halfway through? After that, he doesn't get a line. He just runs around swinging his sword. That's it. At least she has an excuse. She's put to sleep for the second half. Him? God, couldn't we get a grunt or an oof or something? There's also a lot of filler in this movie, and maybe that's one of the reasons why the main characters are so bland. I think this movie really liked its side characters much more. Most of the time is spent with the fairies, the villains, the two kings. That really doesn't lead to anything. So really, it's a very unbalanced film. But again, I guess like most Disney films, the stuff that works well works really, really well. The villain is great, the fairies are great, the animation is great. That ending fight scene is just friggin' fantastic. So it's kind of hard to judge this movie, seeing how not only does it have some good things, but it has some of the best of any of the Disney films. But it goes beyond just typical visuals, it actually does have some very good characters, even if they are the side characters. For that, I think it holds up for several viewings. I did see this film quite a few times growing up, and I did like it every time. There's just several scenes I liked a lot more than others. But they are good scenes and they are good characters. So from a storytelling point of view, the film probably doesn't work. But just from a selfish point of view, in terms of seeing something that you've never seen before or something that's done really, really well, there's a lot of things to enjoy. Even if it turns out on the whole you don't like the film, I still think it's worth looking at. The stuff that's impressive is still really impressive. I know I'm not done watching it, and I'm sure one or two more views are not far in my future. Well, I hope you like Dalmatians, or you're really not gonna like this movie. Well, okay, I shouldn't be that mean to it, but let's just be honest. It's a bunch of Dalmatians. They walk around, they look cute, they talk, they bark, they, I don't know, just do cutesy stuff. If you like that, you're gonna love this film. If not, it's a bit of a bore. I guess there are a few things that stand out about it, like the villain Cruella de Vil, which, ever since the live-action version, has become one of the most infamous villains of all time. And she is a lot of fun, it's just a great design. Sort of this weak, fragile woman under this gigantic, hairy, monstrous fur coat. She's both glamorous and hideous at the same time, and actually is a pretty cool design. And the character's a lot of fun too, constantly screaming, constantly yelling, but always trying to look fabulous while doing it. Her motivation is to get as many Dalmatian puppies as she can to make a bajillion fur coats. And once 15 puppies of our main characters get abducted, which somehow makes the front pages for some reason, the search is on to go and find them. The rest of the characters are not bad, they're just kind of phoned in. The husband and wife are a typical nice husband and wife, the side characters are typical sort of dopey side characters. I think the only one I ever really got into was the cat, because there was just this feeling he would never give up. I mean, yeah, he's constantly screaming, he's constantly running, but he's always sticking with the puppies. Look at that, they're about to bash their brains out, he's still there trying to protect them. That's awesome, go kitty. I guess part of the joke of the movie is how seriously they're treating the dogs. Like how the husband is just as paranoid about the birth of the puppies as, well, the dog is. Or how when the puppies are kidnapped, the maid goes out screaming into the streets and, like I said, it makes front page papers. I don't know, for me, I never found it that funny, so I guess it never got many laughs. I guess the climax is kind of fun. It is rare that you see a car chase in a Disney film, especially with Cruella behind the wheel. And I do enjoy how the car continues to get stripped down and almost starts to turn into just as big a monster as she is. But aside from that, I don't think it has the charm as something like Lady and the Tramp had, or even the animation for it. Although I guess it was sort of groundbreaking in that they were testing rotoscope and copying and so forth and how many puppies they could show. But I don't know if that makes it one of the better Disney films. If you're a dog fan or a Dalmatian fan, you'll probably like it fine, but if not, it's not horrible, it's just not that engaging. Take it for what it's worth, not one of my personal faves. The Sword in the Stone. This is one of those movies I both really love and really hate at the same time. Well, maybe hate's too strong a word, but there's definitely an annoyance to it. Okay, let's talk about the good stuff. These are very memorable characters. Arthur is a naive, innocent boy, and Merlin is sort of this weird, eccentric wizard who's trying to teach him knowledge and wisdom. It's sort of nice having a film about Arthur that doesn't dive right into the sword battles and such, but instead into the philosophies of, well, being a good king. I like how we dive into the education, I like how we dive into him learning everything. But I guess here's my problem with it. That's exactly what it is. It's education and learning things. And it sort of goes at that pace. It's kind of like being in school, except you have an owl and Merlin teaching you stuff as opposed to your boring teachers. But with that said, that is kind of cool. But is that really what kids want to see when they go to watch a Disney film? For me as a kid, I did find myself watching it a lot. Maybe because there was such a laid-back tone to it. I mean, yeah, Arthur becomes a bird, he becomes a fish, he becomes a squirrel, and that's always great for kids. But nothing truly exciting happens until the last third when we get our villain, Mad Madam Mim. And even then, she's more of a side character than the main villain, though she is a lot of fun. And that Wizard's Duel, that whole scene was awesome. I used to watch that over and over when I was younger. It's creative and it's just got some great slapstick. When I got older and I saw that the film was in the video store, I said, you know what, I do remember that movie leaving a big impact on me. Maybe I should watch it again. But when I saw it again, I actually found it a little more boring than I remember. The animation's not really spectacular, and neither's really the backgrounds. And I found it wasn't really learning that much. It's got its good scenes, but I don't know if it really gels as well as it wants it to. I think I admire more what it was trying to do than the final product. But with that said, I do like the relationship between Arthur and Merlin, and the side characters are a lot of fun too. Though, has anyone else noticed that the boy clearly went through puberty when he was doing this voice?
But I've got to get back to the castle. They'll want me in the kitchen.
He was a monster. The biggest fish I ever saw.
There's literally a scene where they play 2 clips of his voice back to back, and they don't gel up. Listen.
Oh, Sir Actor.
Whoa, what? Whoa!
It sounds like 2 different kids. But oh well. The film is a bit of a mixed bag, but I am glad I saw it when I was younger. And I guess I'm glad I saw it when I was older too. There's a lot of creativity, and like I said, I think it was kind of neat that they took this very laid-back tone. But sometimes I think it works to its disadvantage. I do like it, but I think a lot of that is more because of the nostalgia and the idea of it. It's hard to say whether or not the whole thing is worth recommending, but I will say if you do go see it, you'll definitely get 1 or 2 really creative and enjoyable moments. Minimum. The Jungle Book was the last animated film that was made while Disney was alive, which is interesting because the 2 films that would follow would steal such an unbelievable amount of animation from it. And as Disney films go, this is another one that I probably just place in the okay category. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the more sketchy style of Disney animation, at least not around this time period. They always sort of look like pencil sketches that were painted over and never quite looked finished to me. If you're a fan of it, great, it just doesn't do much for me. But teach their own. So, how's the story? Well, based on Rudyard Kipling's book, though very loosely, it follows the story of a little boy, or man-cub as the animals call him, named Mowgli. He's raised by a pack of wolves, but suddenly his life is in danger when the evil tiger Shere Khan is coming to town. Shere Khan hates man, and the wolves know he'll end up ripping him to shreds if he ever finds him. So a panther named Bagheera takes Mowgli to the man village. The only problem is, Mowgli doesn't want to go. He wants to stay in the jungle and tries every chance he can to get away. While on the way, he comes across a friendly bear named Baloo, a marching elephant army, a crazy ape named King Louie, and a hypnotizing snake named Kaa. Well, let's talk about the good stuff. The best thing in this movie is Shere Khan. He's just a great villain. He actually reminds me a lot of Maleficent. There's not really much motivation to him, but just the style and class he has is so friggin' awesome. He's so confident in what a badass he is that it really does actually come off pretty intimidating. He just has nothing to fear. The snake Kaa, though not a main villain, is also pretty cool. Some of the best parts of the movie are just all the jokes they can make with how long he is. Don't take that the wrong way. Aside from that, the boy is okay, the other characters are okay, the songs are, you guessed it, okay. Actually, I take it back. The very last song the girl sings while getting the water actually I think is a very nice tune. I'd almost like to hear a different updated version of it because it actually has a very soothing melody. But aside from that, nothing really stands out too much for me about this Jungle Book, which is a shame because the original book is not only much darker, but it's much more interesting. The way the animal world views the human world is actually sort of a fascinating commentary. The characters are more developed too, and it follows Mowgli through sort of a coming-of-age story, which is really a shame because I think Disney could do the story great. Chuck Jones did a version that was much closer to the book in a half hour. I found that infinitely more fascinating than this film. But as is, there's nothing really bad about the Jungle Book, except, like I said, not following the book that closely. But as its own separate thing, it works out fine. It's a very basic kids film. What you see is what you get. It kept me entertained as a little kid, and I'm sure it'll keep your kids entertained as well. A few creative scenes and 1 or 2 characters definitely make it worth a watch. If you want a film that sums up all the forgettability about Disney, I'd probably point to the Aristocats. I've only seen this movie once or twice in my life, and every time I have, I've totally forgotten that I even watched it. Again, like most Disney movies, there's nothing really that terrible about it. I just can't find anything really spectacular about it, or even that good. Disney movies like this really annoy me though, because it's just being cutesy for the sake of being cutesy. Okay, what's the story? This butler finds that he's gonna inherit a bunch of cats, and it turns out he hates cats. He's allergic to them and can't stand them. So he tries to get rid of them through the old-fashioned cliche of throwing them off a bridge. Which, by the way, am I the only one disturbed that that's an old-fashioned cliche? Do people actually do this? What the fuck was wrong with folks back then? Well, anyway, there are these 2 pretty funny dogs that chase him down, and we do get a pretty entertaining chase scene out of it. But after that, it's just the cats trying to find their way home and the other interesting cats that they come across along the way. There's no depth, there's no intrigue, there's no interesting twists and turns, there's no fun adventure. It's just cats looking cute and bouncing around to fun music. I don't know, even as a kid I remember being really bored by this movie. I hear other people liked it when they were younger, but I don't know many that like it now that they're older. I actually find it one of the weaker Disney films simply because it leaves little to no impact. Even Disney, when it made its biggest mistakes, at least left memorable mistakes. This one I never even have any memory of watching. Yeah, I'm probably being too harsh on it, it probably was meant for much, much younger kids, but from Disney, I expected a lot more. Better story, better characters, better animation. Personally, I'd skip it. How many of us were introduced to Robin Hood through the Disney movie? Well, I can certainly say I was. And it's interesting because I think this is the only Disney film where all the characters are anamorphic life forms. Oh, there's other movies where they use them, but I think this is the first one where every character throughout the entire flick is half human, half animal. There's no people. I'm not sure why they decided to make this the only one, but it works okay. Having Robin Hood as a fox is a clever idea. Little John as this gigantic bear, that works out pretty well. And the others lend their way to a lot of creative jokes also. Okay, what's the story? Well, as Robin Hood goes, I guess it follows it pretty close. Robin Hood robs from the rich and gives to the poor in order to defeat Prince John. He's in love with the lovely Maid Marian and tries to win an archery contest but gets caught in the process, only to fight off the men through many battles and many fun-raising adventures. There's a lot of the cutesiness that you'd expect from a film like this, but actually there are some very entertaining action scenes. Despite it being animated, I'd say many of these scenes are just as impressive as the Errol Flynn version. You can get away with a lot more, so it looks more impressive. Robin is pretty much your very basic nice hero, and Maid Marian is very much your very typical nice maiden. Just a nice little romance to soak up the kids' attention. They stay in their basic roles, and I guess that works out okay. Though, have you ever noticed that Maid Marian just disappears in the last third until they get married? Couldn't they at least have a scene where he says goodbye to her before he goes off to adventure, or maybe she's helping out with the scheme, or maybe she's watching him as he's running away? I don't know. She had so many scenes before, why just cut her out of the third act? Well, anywho, the villain is Prince John, and he's a very fun comedic villain, especially when working off of his psychic, Hiss. He's definitely a very femmy villain, and a lot of times that leads to a lot of very funny moments, including some great arguments with Hiss, which makes them look very much like a married couple. No. When watching it again, I actually found the Sheriff of Nottingham was pretty funny too. He's just such a bastard in the various ways he'll find to rip people off. Even a blind person, that is evil.
What a dirty trick.
The climax is one of the best in Disney history. I know that's weird seeing how they're all cutesy animals, but it's a really suspenseful climax. The first half of it is done very much in silence. A lot of whispering, a lot of quiet music, a lot of sneaking around. And then once the cover is blown, it's just fast-paced action throughout the rest of it. It's just great because everywhere the main character turns, there's always something else trying to get him. He just cannot get a break throughout this entire scene. You got arrows flying at him, axes, henchmen, fire, and it just keeps building higher and higher throughout the castle. It's a really good setup. Overall, Robin Hood is a very good kids' adventure film. It's not great, and I don't know how many great things are really in it, but it is very entertaining. Some parts drag, but when it doesn't, it's a lot of fun. Kids will definitely love it, and my guess is some of the adults might find themselves getting sucked in as well. Who doesn't love Winnie the Pooh? Hell, he's like one of the most innocent things on the planet. I think there's a law actually forbidding people not to like him. I know people who despise Mickey Mouse, but they can't bring themselves to actually say they hate Winnie the Pooh. So what is it? What is it that just makes him so likable? Well, I think a lot of it has to deal with the fact that while he is very optimistic, he does make mistakes, and he does get in trouble. He's very naive, but he's also very pleasant. And I think that makes him much more interesting than someone like Mickey Mouse. He's still positive, but there's just much more of a character to play with. And it all started with this one film, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. These characters are so famous now, I don't even have to name them. Kanga, Roo, Tigger, Owl, Rabbit, Piglet, Eeyore, the list goes on. The story is very loose in that there's not that much of a flowing narrative. It's just sort of the life of Pooh and his friends through the course of, I don't know, a year maybe? It's just all the troubles, circumstances, and weird situations they get in, and how they manage to live or get around it. As a kid, I liked it fine, but watching it now years later, actually, it's a lot better than I remember it. They actually make a lot of fourth wall jokes using the book that they're in, and even sometimes talk with the narrator. But that's not the only reason it's good. There's just this sense to it, this atmosphere, this real likability to this world that they've created. It's very laid back, it's very slow paced, but at the same time, these characters are just so interesting and so nice that you really enjoy spending time with them. You don't care if not much is going on. You could just have a conversation with any one of these people and you'd probably be very satisfied. I really like movies like that. They don't feel they have to stick to the 3-act structure and instead just let you shoot the shit for a bit. They just let characters breathe and do whatever it is they do. And these characters are really enjoyable and the situations they get in are really enjoyable. We got some real creative scenarios with a windstorm, Pooh trying to get more honey, and of course another trippy as hell Disney scene with epalumps and woozles.
Heffalump or woozles, very slide, slide.
The songs are catchy and clever, the animation I think actually matches the mood and style they're going for. And like I said, there's just a real heavy atmosphere to it. Especially like the ending. There's no big climax, no chase scene, no major discoveries. It's just Christopher Robin talking with his imaginary friend, and the inevitability of the future.
Pooh, when I'm away just doing nothing, will you come up here sometimes? Promise you won't forget me?
Oh, I won't, Christopher. I promise.
That's actually kind of heavy stuff. Winnie the Pooh is not often looked at as one of the great Disney films, but it is looked at as one of the great Disney characters. And that's all the film is, just enjoying this character and all the people that surround him. It's clever, it's nice, it's friendly. I really enjoyed watching it again. In fact, it's one of the few Disney films where I like it just as much as a kid as I do as an adult. It takes me right back to that same place I enjoy, and I always love coming back. Okay, I'll just get it out of the way. There's a picture of a naked woman in this movie. Disney is full of pervs. There, done. Now let's talk about the movie. The Rescuers. Sort of along the same veins of the Aristocats or 101 Dalmatians in that there's not much magic, not much stellar animation, and mostly just cutesy animals looking, well, cutesy. Though I don't think it's as bad as something as the Aristocats, there is a little bit more story and character to it. Nothing much really stands out about it. It centers around a little girl who's being held by this evil woman who wants her to go inside this mine and get this incredibly valuable diamond. Talk about child labor laws. Well, it turns out there's a big group of mice called the Rescued Aid Society that go in and try to help people in such circumstances. Definitely a creative idea, I guess, though I guess like most people in the movie, I wonder what the heck a bunch of mice can do in rescuing a bunch of people. But I guess that's the point of the film. There's no person too small, yada yada yada. So two mice named Bernard and Miss Bianca go out to rescue her while also coming across a bunch of colorful characters. I guess I remember a few things that stood out, like some of the bad guys actually are entertaining. Like this crazy lady who's holding the girl looks like something out of a 1940s French bordello. A really bad 1940s French bordello. Her reactions a lot of the time are pretty fun to watch. She also has this blithering sidekick who once in a while gets a good line, and she also has these two alligators that are probably one of the funniest things in the movie. Aside from that, it's just more cutesiness. The little girl is obnoxious. I can't stand her. She's like one of the Olsen twins. She's just designed to look precious.
Rude. Yarrow, did you let that little brat escape again? You're too soft.
Yeah, most of the movie is just filled with other scenes that drag or are overly cutesy or don't really seem to have much point to them. I don't hate it, I just don't remember it doing very much for me. Even as a kid, I sort of remember being bored by it. Again, with the exception of one or two comedic scenes. Not really a fan. I'd probably say there's much better Disney movies you can watch. Fox and the Hound is another one of those Disney movies that probably has too many cutesy scenes in it, but to its credit, it uses it much more to its advantage. The film's about a little fox who loses his mother and gets taken up by an old lady. She unfortunately, though, happens to live right next door to a hunter who has a dog. Two dogs, actually, but one of them's a puppy trying to learn how to hunt. Obviously, you'd think these two wouldn't get along, but they seem to hit it off pretty well. As time goes on, their friendship becomes stronger, despite the fact that everybody's telling them they're gonna be the worst of enemies. But they keep playing and having fun and constantly get into trouble. It's not until the dog is taken away for a long time and becomes a professional hunting dog that he returns and finds that their friendship can't be the way they were. Through an accident, the fox injures the dog's best friend and the dog vows vengeance. And on top of that, the woman finds she just can't hold on to the fox anymore and sets him free in the wild. This, according to every woman I've ever talked to, is a big tearjerker scene. So the two are now enemies out for blood and try to see who will come out on top. It's a good setup for a story, and they do it pretty well, but I have to admit I felt like it could be stronger. Like, instead of the best friend getting injured, why didn't he die? I'm sorry, it's just, this movie would have been a lot more powerful if that dog died. Or how about when the woman is letting the fox go, just having some instrumental music, or even have it silent instead of playing whatever pop song was popular at the time. Little tidbits like that really keep me from loving this film, but as a Disney film, it's pretty strong. The big scene after the climax is a very good payoff, and you do find yourself very invested in it. And like I said, some of the cutesy scenes drag, but I think it's allowed to drag, sort of in the same way Bambi was allowed to drag. You know you're gonna get to the harder stuff later. I just wish it was a little harder. I don't know, maybe it's the sick bastard in me, but I think this could have been a little bit more adult. But as is, it's a decent movie. The songs aren't really that memorable, and I don't remember too many of the side characters either, but it's the friendship between the two of them that really holds up. I'd say it's definitely worth your time taking a watch. After Disney's death, the studio didn't have the stream of big hits that it used to. I mean, it had a big hit every once in a while, but for the most part, it never quite hit the Snow White standards. And on top of that, the films were just taking longer and longer and longer to make. So if the film didn't really wow audiences, people sort of felt they got gypped. And the film that many Disney fans call the crowning achievement of failure is The Black Cauldron. How bad is it? Well, for a movie that had a ton of money put into both the animation and the advertising, it failed to please audiences and critics alike, proving to be a gigantic financial failure. This film did so bad that on its opening weekend it lost to the Care Bears movie. You heard right, a Disney film lost to the Care Bears movie. It was considered the lowest point in Disney history. So wow, this film must be really, really bad, right? Well, yeah. Despite the fact that it's starting to grow sort of a cult following, it really doesn't hold up that well. At least for my taste. What's the story? Well, it's about this teenage boy who wants to be a hero. The only problem is he's much more talk and much less do. And when I say talk, I mean really talk. I mean, this kid doesn't shut up.
Dorban doesn't understand. I'm not a little boy anymore. I should be doing heroic deeds for Prydain. Is this to be my life? Pampering a pig? I'm a warrior.
And I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it look like he's full of himself, but an innocent, and then when he enters the real world, he's gonna discover things about himself, blah, 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 blah. But I'm sorry, his voice is annoying. And on top of that, his ego is annoying. He barely does anything in this movie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. But without the help of my pig Henwin here,
He just praises himself, and God, I want to smack him! Well, anyway, he's looking after this pig named Henwig, who has this very distinct power of whenever you put her head in a puddle of water, she can see the future. Isn't that weird? Well, apparently there's this evil demon known as the Horned King, and he wants possession of the pig so he can take her and look into the future to see if she can lead him to the Black Cauldron. What's the Black Cauldron? Apparently it's a device that can bring people back from the dead and create an invincible army. Along the way, he comes across a princess. Yeah, imagine, a princess in a Disney film. And I know I go on and on about princess rants, but really, there is absolutely no point to having her be a princess in this movie. Even by Disney standards, she doesn't do anything princessy. She doesn't wear fancy dresses, she doesn't give orders, she doesn't, I don't know, sing. We don't even see her kingdom. We don't even see her castle. We don't see anything that Disney loves to market when it comes to princesses. All she's got going for her is the name, so really there was no reason for it. There's also this really annoying comic relief that's sort of like a mix between oatmeal and a hairball. Yeah, you thought Jar Jar Binks' voice was annoying? Get a load of this.
Oh, poor miserable Gurgi deserves fierce smackings and whackings on his poor tender head.
Yeah, between these two characters' voices, I want to strangle this film. Even the music by the great Elmore Bernstein. All I hear throughout the entire thing is Ghostbusters. Listen. Tell me that doesn't sound like the Zool theme. Okay, so for all my bitching and moaning, is this really one of the worst Disney films of all time? Well, I don't know if I can go that far. I mean, it is annoying, but there is some creativity to the animation, though not much. And as frustrating as it can get, it never gets to a point where it says anything bad. I mean, I can't think of any bad messages or morals or anything. It's just sort of bland and forgettable, like a lot of the Disney films that were coming out at that time. It's not the worst, but it's definitely one of the lower ones. But like I said, the film's really starting to grow in fans, and I find more and more people actually sort of have this secret like for it. So maybe there is something there that can grab a certain group of people. But it certainly didn't grab me, and it certainly didn't grab a lot of audiences at the time. Black Cauldron is often called one of Disney's biggest failures. I think it's just kind of a bad movie. Not the worst, but I'd probably skip it. Mouse Detective. This is actually one of the first Disney films I ever saw in theaters. And when you're a little kid watching the magic of Disney on the big screen, this is exactly what you want to open up with. Mommy, that's scary as fuck! Well, after that, the movie is actually much more tame, at least not quite as creepy. The movie is about a little girl trying to get her father back. She comes across a mouse named Dawson, and they both come across a mouse named Basil of Baker Street, who's the rodent equivalent of Sherlock Holmes. In fact, he actually lives in Sherlock Holmes' house. They're off to not only find the little girl's father, but also stop an evil villain named Ratigan, played by Vincent Price. His plan is to have her father make a robotic queen so that he can replace her at some sort of ceremony where the robotic queen would then name him the ruler of the land. I don't know. It's for kids. Mice are running around, they can talk. You can get away with this shit, I guess. And anyway, that's not the focus of the movie. The focus of the movie is actually what it should be. The hero and the villain. The hero in this movie is great. He's this egotistical but still very likable character. He's energized, he's kooky, he's tenacious, he's a jerk sometimes, but he's got a good heart. It's all that great stuff you love in a hero. And on top of that, he's smart as hell. It's actually one of those few Disney films where you admire how intelligent the main character is. I mean, from beginning to end, you actually want to be smarter watching it. And then, of course, there's the villain, voiced by Vincent Price. What more do I have to say? It's Vincent Price, and he is loving every minute of it. He's egotistical, he's selfish, he sings, he prances around, he giggles. He just enjoys being nasty so much that it's hard not to enjoy it along with him. The two play off each other brilliantly. It's just these two gigantic, brilliant egos working off of one another. I usually find that with a celebrity voice, even the really good ones, you can often sort of feel them in the recording booth. Like, yeah, they're acting, but you know they're acting. You can see them saying their lines into the microphone. With Vincent Price, I never got that. He's just right there, in the role. It's rad again. Watch this movie again and tell me if you can really disconnect the recording of Vincent Price with the animation of the character. They're just flawless.
Oh, by the way, Basil, I just love your disguise. One would hardly recognize you.
They meld together perfectly. And while we're on the subject of the animation, it's pretty good too. I think this is actually the first time they started using computer graphics in an animated movie. And speaking of that, it makes for a great climax. There's a giant fight scene in the clock tower, and it's among one of Disney's best. The angles are great, the music builds, the pacing is wonderful, and we see Ratigan finally show his true colors. In fact, it gets pretty violent. I mean, there's no blood or anything, but there might as well be. The sound effects and everything really make it look like it hurts. But hey, when you're a little kid, that just sucks you in even more. The Great Mouse Detective is really smart, really delightful, and really fun. It is sort of your typical little mouse adventure where they just look at the big world and sort of create their own little world and you laugh and giggle at it. But like I said, what sets it apart from the other ones is the main character and the main villain. They're just a ton of fun to watch. I think it's one that often sneaks under the radar for most Disney fans, but it's definitely worth checking out. Find it on DVD and discover for yourself. Okay, so in all honesty, it's a little hard to talk about Oliver and Company without talking about another animated film that came out the exact same weekend, The Land Before Time. When I was a kid, Oliver and Company was the movie I wanted to see. I heard the Billy Joel songs, I saw the animation, I saw the cool dogs, I saw New York. It just looked like an awesome movie. But it was sold out at the time, and my folks could only get tickets to The Land Before Time. So I said, okay, well, I guess I can see that. And The Land Before Time, as most of you know, was a really great film. The animation was great, the story was great, and it was very Disney-esque. But we're not reviewing that, we're reviewing Oliver and Company, the film I really wanted to see as a little kid. So next week, we got our tickets, sat on down, and after Land Before Time, this was really underwhelming. I know it's weird saying that even as I'm an adult talking about this and reviewing it again, but the reason I bring it up is because The Land Before Time was much more like a Disney film than Oliver and Company was. It did a much better job teaching life lessons with really heavy scenes and, well, really memorable characters. Oliver and Company definitely seemed like a marketing tool. Even as a kid, I sort of felt manipulated by it. In fact, I actually remember enjoying the toys much more than I remember enjoying the movie. Yeah, I had a Cheech Marin dog, what about it? Anyway, let's get to the actual story. It's the basic Oliver Twist story, except with animals. And it doesn't take place in the time of Charles Dickens, it takes place in modern-day New York City. Here, that sketchy drawn style actually has a little bit more of a home. It sort of looks like an etching you'd see maybe in a New York store or a fine art store or something like that. In this version, Oliver isn't a boy, he's a kitten. And Dodger isn't a boy either, he's a dog. But not just a dog, a grown-up dog, voiced by Billy Joel. In terms of the Oliver story, I really find that distracting. I liked how Dodger and Oliver sort of had a connection, how they were sort of the same age, and blah 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 blah. If I'm gonna connect this to the original Oliver story, I'm gonna be really disappointed. There's really no point in setting it in modern day, or in New York, or with animals. So let's just ignore that for now and look at the story as it is. Oliver meets up with a bunch of tough dogs who are owned by this bum voiced by Dom DeLuise. He does dealings with this gangster, but not because he wants to, more because he just got himself in a bad situation. Much like Oliver Twist though, Oliver finds himself in the hands of a much nicer family, and he's constantly flip-flopping back and forth throughout the entire film. The nice family has a dog voiced by Bette Midler. And of course she gets a song.
Pretty is nice, but still, it's just pretty!
Eventually it ends up in this kind of complicated story about kidnapping the little girl, and now Oliver and the gang have to go save her. I I guess it leads to kind of a neat climax, and actually one of the best villain deaths ever. I literally remember nothing about this villain except how he dies. Watch this. That is awesome. Aside from that, the movie only has a few things to offer. One is that goddamn catchy song, and it is catchy. You'll be humming it all day once you watch this review. Why should I worry? Tell me, why should I care? But surprisingly, I don't think the other songs are very catchy. I think they just had this one big hit and they just exploited it like mad. I do remember Cheech Marin as the Chihuahua, and yeah, he gets a funny line every once in a while. It's funny thinking he'd come back as a hyena a few years later. And actually, I really do like the way they portray New York. After finally having been there, I gotta say, it's pretty close to accurate. It's big, but it's tight. There's a lot of attitude, but there's a lot of character too. From an animation point of view, I think they got it down spot on. But aside from that, it's surprisingly forgettable. I don't remember too many of the characters, and like I said, the songs don't really leave you humming much except for the one. And yeah, for Disney to do a version of Oliver, I sort of expected a lot more than this. At least for it to make a bigger impact. But again, it's not awful. It's just strange thinking that the non-Disney film at the time was turning out the much better Disney product. If you're an animal person, maybe you'll get into some of the cutesiness of it, but aside from that, it's nothing to scream about. But let's face it, this was just the film to tide us over before the next gigantic hit. After the disappointment of The Black Cauldron, Disney suddenly got on this huge kick. Not only were they going to turn out better products, but they were going to turn them out fast. The films went from coming out every 5 to 7 to even 10 years to suddenly every year. And the film that sparked the Disney Golden Era, the revolutionary film that starred hit after hit after hit again, The Little Mermaid. Yeah, you all know it, you've all seen it, and now we're going to talk about it. Is there any point in comparing it to the Hans Christian Andersen story? I mean, we all know she doesn't die in the end. Disney wouldn't do that. In fact, hell, I think they couldn't do that. So much like Oliver and Company, let's just keep it to the content as is. This is the first film in a long time where the animation was actually looking like Disney animation again. This was the return to the fairy tale, the smooth lines, the nice songs, the beautiful backgrounds, all the stuff that started with Snow White and most people think of when they hear the word Disney. The story is about Ariel, a 16-year-old girl who's obsessed with being on dry land. Her father forbids it, but then she falls in love with a handsome prince. After saving his life, she decides that she absolutely wants to become human so that she can be with him. So she sells her voice to Ursula the Sea Witch and gets herself a pair of legs. The only downside is she can't tell the prince who she is, which means she has to start from scratch in order to win him over. Of course, while the Sea Witch is plotting her way to get control of the underworld, or underwater world. The feedback I get from this movie is fascinating, and not actually from guys, believe it or not, but from women. I find they either love or hate this movie, and all of it centers around the main character, Ariel. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's look at the good stuff. The music, you know it in and out. It's Alan Menken's songs, and man, are they memorable, catchy as hell. They're bouncy, they're fun, they're slow, they're romantic, they're diabolical. He gets the tone just right. The comic relief, they're also fun. There's some fun tidbits with the crab, you have Buddy Hackett as the seagull, there's that crazy-ass chef voiced by Odo. It's pretty good. The animation, top-notch. This is the animation people wanted to see from Disney for a while, and man did it blow people away. It still blows me away. Watching it today, looking at these angles, looking at the colors, everything, it just pops. The villain is great. Much like Ratigan, she just so enjoys what she's doing, although it's much more of a revenge fest than it is just to be evil. So maybe her plot has a little bit more motivation. And I like the fact that this was the first Disney film where the couple actually had to build their romance from something. They didn't just meet and suddenly love each other. Well, okay, they meet and they love each other, but at the same time, they have to meet and they have to work at it again. It's not like Snow White where they meet and they get married, or Sleeping Beauty where they meet, they sing, and suddenly they're in love. There is some development here, even though it did take, what, 3 days? Well, okay, in the Disneyverse, that was a long time. But let's get to what most women either love or hate. The Little Mermaid herself, Ariel. Okay, so what's bad about her? well, she is whiny. Even her nice songs, when you get down to it, is just very pretty whining. She certainly has all the typical 16-year-old cliches, like hating her father, talking about boys, wanting to throw her life away for them. Now let's be honest, that's kind of typical for a lot of girls. So maybe that's why some women hate it. I mean, I guess Bella is living out a lot of girls' fantasies too, but it doesn't necessarily make her a good character. But she definitely has a passion and a drive that sets her apart from a lot of the other Disney women. She's a hopeless romantic, but she's also determined. When she wants something, she'll go to whatever lengths it takes to get it. So, for the most part, I thought a lot of the backlash about the character was just sort of nitpicking. But then I watched Lindsay's review and she brought this up.
She doesn't really change. She doesn't learn anything. Ariel wants something, there are obstacles. She gets what she wants, the end.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Despite her causing all this trouble, she still gets exactly what she wants. She whines and complains, and in the end, she's rewarded for it. But you could make a very slim argument that once they have her and she's apologizing, that she has acknowledged she made a mistake, and that admittedly she should have done it.
Daddy, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
But the scene is 2 seconds long, and I don't know, she gets her way anyway at the end, so it doesn't really matter. I guess there are some major character flaws with her, so why do I still enjoy her? Well, horrible to say, I actually really like it when she can't talk. Yeah, I know, make whatever women shouldn't speak joke you want, but that's not the reason I like it. I like it because her curiosity comes out in full bloom. She isn't complaining here, she's enjoying. She's in heaven seeing all these new things. She's a wanderer, she's an explorer, she likes discovering things. And nowhere does that come out clearer in just the simple expressions and the great animation here. Even her songs, which are complaining, I guess, actually really do show how she feels about a situation. And is very passionate. So I guess that's what a lot of people really do get behind in this movie. So yeah, deconstructing childhoods aside, how does this film hold up? Well, I guess it has the ethical flaws that a lot of people say are just ethical flaws in Disney films in general. You know, just meeting a person in a day, wanting to marry them, not always dealing with the consequences of your actions. But the stuff that's good is really friggin' good. The music, like I said, outstanding. Some of the best. The animation, stellar. The comic relief, memorable. The villain, awesome. Even the father character, a character that usually gets tossed aside in most Disney movies, is actually pretty well developed here. And our main characters, despite their flaws, still have a lot of things you can like about them. Personally, I still really enjoy it. It has its issues, but the good stuff is just too damn good. And this would only be the first monster hit that would set Disney on a roll. After The Great Mouse Detective, we all know the release of the Disney films after it, right? Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, and so forth. Wrong. Between Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, there was actually another animated film that everybody seems to gloss over, The Rescuers Down Under. Even today, when I bring up The Rescuers Down Under, everybody says, oh, the little girl in the cave with the skull and diamond, right? No, why does everyone always remember the bland, forgettable one? How ironic is that? I'll admit, out of all the Disney films to give a sequel, it's kind of weird that they did The Rescuers, but you know what? They put their damnest into this movie. This is one of the best looking Disney adventures that has ever come out of the studio, and I have no idea why it continues to get the shaft. Alright, so what's the story? We have a little boy in Australia, who of course doesn't have an Australian accent, who comes across a giant golden eagle, the last one alive. He frees it from a trap, but then a poacher, played by George C. Scott, captures him and tries to force him to tell him the location of the bird. This gets attention all the way from across the world and leads to New York, where Bernard and Miss Bianca, voiced again by Bob Newhart and Zsa Zsa Gabor, are requested to go down there and save it. Instead of using Oval, the bird from the last movie, we instead this time get Wilbur. Get it? Oval and Wilbur. It works. But it works even better when you have the comedic genius of John Candy supplying the voice.
May I just say enchanté, senorita, to you? May I?
This is just another great, passionate role that he gets into, and he's wonderful as always. What Miss Bianca doesn't know is that Bernard is trying to propose to her all throughout the movie, and yet he constantly keeps getting distracted by this other mouse who's trying to put the moves on. You really feel for this guy. All he wants to do is pop the question and some crap keeps happening to interrupt him. It's more of a cock block than the Legend of Zelda cartoon. Okay, so as you can hear, the story is nothing fantastic. It's just sort of your basic everyday adventure with little mice. Kinda like the first one. Except it's done a million bajillion gajillion times better. Like the scene where the boy frees the eagle. He could just free her and then she just takes him back to the nest, right? It'd take a minute to do. But fuck that shit, we get an intense fall off a mountain, flying through the sky, skating on a river, jumping off a waterfall. Holy fuck. Just watch some of this animation. Yeah, this is what you're missing, folks. How come nobody's looking at this? On top of that, it's a good adventure. It's got some great action scenes, the villain is great. Hey, it's George C. Scott. The main characters are likable, the backgrounds are unbelievable, the animation, as I said before, is spectacular. It's fun, it's funny, it's just a great family adventure film. There was even a short before it with Mickey Mouse called The Prince and the Pauper. And you know what? That's also underrated. It's a really good short. Check it out. I'm sure it's on DVD somewhere. So, okay, why is it this movie gets so overlooked? Well, I got two theories. One is that on the first weekend, the film didn't open very strong, so Disney immediately pulled all advertising from it. So the reason you probably never heard of it is because you weren't allowed to hear of it. Advertising and publicity after that was kept very tight. But I think the other reason it doesn't do so hot is because it doesn't have any of the typical Disney formula. It's not a fairy tale, there's no song, there's no strong ethics or morals, and it doesn't have any of the extremely cute fuzzy animals that they love to market. I mean, the rescuers are cute, I guess, but it's no Flounder. But so what? It's not supposed to be any of those things. It's just supposed to be a really good adventure film. And not only is it good, it's incredibly good. Do we look at films like Raiders of the Lost Ark or Terminator 2 as bad simply because they're not as good as something like Citizen Kane? No, they're still celebrated, they're still the top of their class. So how come this one doesn't get any glory? Folks, we gotta turn this around. We have to increase the DVD sales of this movie because you know what? More people deserve to see it. Yeah, it's a family action flick, but it's a phenomenal family action flick. Taking a subject material that really had little going for it and turning it into a friggin' experience. Check it out, folks. You won't regret it. Okay, so a lot of you know that my favorite animated Disney film is Fantasia, of course. But if I had to choose one that told a coherent story from beginning to end, cashing in on the Disney fairy tale aspect, then that would definitely have to be Beauty and the Beast. Why? Because everything is done perfect. The main character is perfect, the villain is perfect, the romance is perfect, the songs are perfect. Even the design of the castle, look at that thing! It's like something out of The Haunting, it's just friggin' incredible. But let's start at the beginning. We get a cleverly narrated backstory through stained glass windows, telling us the tale about how the prince, who had little to no love in his heart, gets turned into a beast by a sorcerer after treating her so cruel. He was given a magic rose that is slowly withering away. If he can learn how to fall in love and be loved in return, he'll go back to human. Thus we enter Belle. She's the oddball of the neighborhood because she's hot as hell, but she doesn't flaunt it. She doesn't hang out with other women fawning over men, she just reads her books and doesn't bother anybody, which of course confuses a very gossipy town. That is, except for Gaston. In any other movie, he'd probably be the hero. But here, he's the good-looking villain who has much more muscle than brains. He thinks that because he's the best-looking man in town and Belle's the best-looking woman in town, naturally they should get married. Isn't that great logic? But when Belle turns him down, he swears to get his bride. While that's going on, Belle's father leaves town and comes across an enchanted castle where the Beast lives. But the Beast says he's trespassing and throws him in the dungeon, where Belle finds him later. She exchanges her life for his, and he lets him go. Though the Beast sees this as an opportunity to finally fall in love, he's not very social. In fact, he's downright, well, beastly.
I thought I told you to come down for dinner!
I'm not hungry.
I'll break down the door!
But through the help of some very well chosen and very well paced events, the two actually do start to fall in love with each other. They both slowly start to let down their defenses and start to see the good in one another. Which of course leads to romance, sadness, action, bloodshed, magic, all that good stuff. People fell in love with this movie. In fact, at the time, it was the only animated film to be nominated for Best Picture. That was unheard of. So why did it hit a chord with so many people? Well, first of all, it goes back to the Disney roots, but follows all the way through. It's a fairy tale, and it knows that, and it totally engulfs itself in it. But as fairy tales go, there's a few twists. This time the couple actually has to take their time to fall in love with each other. They don't just meet and suddenly they're meant for one another. And the movie is actually very clever at never saying how long they're together. It could be weeks, it could be months. So that way you're allowed to draw your own conclusions. The villain is a much more realistic villain. He doesn't start off just evil and bad, he's actually the town hero. But as he fails to get his way for longer and longer, he turns to more desperate measures, which leads to one of the more obvious, but still pretty poignant lines.
He's no monster, Gaston. You are.
And then you got Belle. Belle is one of the best animated characters ever. She looks good, but she doesn't show off. She's kind, though she has her limits. People mock her, though she could really care less. And she's just off doing her own thing, not giving a shit what anybody says. On top of that, she's looking for something a little more specific than most Disney female leads. And that's something greater than herself. Something grand, something spectacular, something that she can barely comprehend. That's actually pretty deep for a kid's film. It's much better than saying I want a prince or feet or whatever. And it also works out because it turns out what she's searching for is in the very last place she would ever look. Now there is an argument that maybe Belle is too perfect. That she's not really that complex because she doesn't have many problems or flaws. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't see that. She's much more of a role model, the kind of person we want to be as opposed to the kind of people we encounter. But I don't know. If it's still a good role model and the character still seems existable, I don't see much of a problem. I don't really see the downside in liking her. It's that belief in the best of humanity. So for me, I really enjoy her. She's kind, smart, and just does her own thing. I should also talk about the Beast too. I love the way this thing is designed. Whenever I heard the story of Beauty and the Beast before this movie came out, this is pretty much what I imagined the Beast looked like. Very big, very werewolf-like, so I thought he was awesome. I guess if I had to pick one problem with the movie, it would be the design of the human version of the Beast. The animators say that no matter what they put there, the people wouldn't have been happy because, well, they fell in love with the Beast and not this guy. I think that's kinda true, but I don't know. If you put in Eric or Aladdin or something, I don't think anyone would complain. And plus, people fell in love with the Beast because you called him Beast. What's his real name? Did she just keep calling him Beast after he transformed? No, it's a nitpick. Do I really have to explain what else is good about this movie? You all know the songs, you all know how great the animation is, you all remember these characters. It's just a flawless film. As I get older and older, it only gets better and better. It's the pure Disney fairy tale done to the absolute best. I'd say go see it, but let's face it, you already have. When I was a kid, Aladdin was my favorite Disney movie. I felt like even though I liked Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, this was the first Disney movie for boys. It had action, it had sword fights, it had lava, it had flying around on magic carpets, it had monsters, it had comedy, it had a lot of adult jokes that I actually sort of understood, it had kick-ass songs, it was just awesome. But I will admit, as I get older, that novelty seems to wear off a bit. Unlike Beauty and the Beast that gets better and better as I get older, I do see more and more the flaws of Aladdin. Okay, well let's look at the story. Aladdin is a thief trying to get by on the streets. He comes across a princess named Jasmine who's trying to get away from the palace to make a life for her own. But he gets captured by a sorcerer named Jafar and gets manipulated into searching for a magic lamp. Here, he comes across a flying carpet, and of course, the genie. Do I even need to say who voiced him?
Hello, Aladdin. Nice to have you on the show. Can we call you Al, or maybe just Din? Or how about Laddie?
So he goes back to town using one of his wishes to turn himself into a prince. This allows him the possibility to marry the princess, but Jafar won't let it happen. He tries to kill Aladdin and take the lamp away so he can use the genie for his own diabolical powers. You get your sword fight, giant monsters, action, comedy, all that good stuff. So what is it about Aladdin that does or doesn't work? Well, a lot of the time, it's sort of the same thing. Aladdin is very modern. Even Agrabah looks much more like Vegas than it does an Arabian city. Of course, Robin Williams' jokes, while funny, all come from a way that current people talk and even movies that haven't been made by this time period. In fact, they didn't even know what movies were back then. So there's a lot of breaking the fourth wall jokes and of course a lot of modern day talk.
I'm in the mood to help you, dude.
Well, most of it modern. Aladdin and Jasmine, though they don't quote as many movie stars as Williams does, still seem out of their time period too. They seem more like Gen Xers than they do the product of an Arabian village. Jafar is pretty cool, and the Sultan is enjoyably stupid. But most of it doesn't seem to take place once upon a time, but more around the time that maybe Shrek lives in. In fact, yeah, Shrek probably stole a lot from this movie, didn't they? So does that make Aladdin bad? Not necessarily. If anything, it makes it unique. It's a very different take that Disney was trying to do, and apparently it really paid off. The jokes Robin Williams makes is funny, and despite the fact that it doesn't look like Arabia, it still looks great. The colors in this movie are just wonderful, as well as the lighting. On top of that, what I think is really important is that Aladdin and Jasmine do have chemistry. Yeah, I know, it's another 3-day romance and then suddenly they get married, but you know what? You believe they're in love. They do have conversations, they do talk about their problems, and they do try to help each other out. Okay, it's not Beauty and the Beast, but it works okay. The songs are still awesome. It's still Alan Menken, and it's still those incredibly catchy beats. At times, some of the modern talk can get a little annoying, like when Aladdin tries to act cool or Gilbert Gottfried yells some more, but I think it still has the same Disney heart, and it is very entertaining. So while I don't like it as much as I did when I was a kid, I still do like it. There's still a lot of things to admire, a lot of things to laugh at, and a lot of things to hum after leaving the theater. As long as you know what you're getting yourself into, chances are you'll have a pretty good time. Now we come to the big one, The Lion King, the highest grossing 2D animated film of all time. When this movie came out, every kid was nuts. We were humming all the songs, we were reenacting all the scenes, we were talking about all the characters. It was just a gigantic flick. So is it bad to say I think it's kind of overrated? Okay, just hear me out. While I don't think it's bad, I don't think it's the strongest of Disney's works either. I don't even know if I necessarily put it in the top 5. But that doesn't mean there aren't some very impressive things about it, or that the film as a whole doesn't work. Well here, let's start from the beginning. We start with the birth of the new Prince Simba. Do I even need to tell you how they celebrate this? So young Simba is shown around by King Mufasa how to rule as a good king. But his uncle Scar is angry because he was next in line to be king. So he constantly tries to set traps with the hyenas to kill him off. But Mufasa is always there to save him, so there's only one logical choice: kill Mufasa. This leads to a very intense and very well done chase scene with a bunch of wildebeest. Scar sees his opportunity and throws him off a cliff. Simba, thinking that he started the stampede, feels incredibly guilty and Scar advises him to run away. Why he doesn't just kill him right there, I don't know. But Simba goes into exile and comes across a team known as Timon and Pumbaa. They tell him that it's okay to run away from your problems and start a new life over. And that's exactly what he does. He spends most of his years growing up with the two and decides never to go back. That is until his old childhood friend shows up and tells him that things are terrible back at home. And since he is the rightful king, he's the only one that can go back and make things better. But Simba doubts himself, thinking he still killed his father, until he gets a vision in the sky. His father says nut up, and Simba decides to go back home and fight his uncle. And you know the drill. Big climax, comic relief, get some laughs, and then the final showdown between the two of them. Okay, so what problems do I have with a story that actually seems almost adult, in that it stole from the most famous of adult plays? Well, let's get to my biggest problem with the film. The message. Actually, the message I really like, and I think it's a very adult message. I especially like it when he talks to Rafiki about it.
Ow! But the way I see it, you can either run from it, or learn from it.
Now that's really clever, and I'm totally behind that. What I'm not behind is that when he does go back to face his fears start to win, and everything he was taught before suddenly is working against him. Nobody even gets behind him, nobody's standing up for him. That is until it turns out he didn't commit the crime that he thought he did. So I guess the moral of the story is never take responsibility for what you've done, because nobody will be behind you unless it turns out you didn't really do it. Yeah, how is this confronting his past? It's a past that never happened, so it doesn't matter. And even when he thought it did happen, the movie didn't support him. Almost as if the film was saying if he did accidentally kill his father, he deserves to die. Look, nobody's on his side until he comes out and says, haha, it wasn't me. And I'm sorry, that's a serious flaw. If you think it's something that just my over-analyzing adult mind thought of, no, I was thinking of this as a kid too. This film didn't teach me to come forward with my mistakes and to take the responsibility for it. It taught me to convince people that I didn't do the mistake, because that way I'll have a happy ending. Okay, so good intention gets totally botched. What else don't I like? Well, the songs. Yeah, I know, but I'm sorry, I don't like these songs. Well, I take it back. Be Prepared is awesome. Circle of Life is good. Though I think a lot of that is more Hans Zimmer's orchestrations. Can You Feel the Love Tonight? Hate it. I Can't Wait to Be King? Hate it. Hakuna Matata? Holy fuck balls, I hate this song. I I hated it when it first came out. I was boggled by the fact that everybody was actually singing this. It's annoying. While I was constantly humming Be Prepared at school, all the other kids were constantly singing Hakuna Matata.
I'm surrounded by idiots.
On top of that, big shock, I think Matthew Broderick is pretty bland. Jonathan Taylor Thomas is a little bit too, but to be fair, he's a kid, and he really does sell those crime scenes. The villain, well, good, is a little too simplistic. I don't know, he seems so smart and intelligent, but then when he takes over, he seems like a little child. That just sucks out all the dignity and likability that you have for a villain. It's like if Maleficent, after she got her way, suddenly started going nee 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 nee. And there's also details like how did the water come flowing back after Simba took over? Why did the weather get better? Why is it suddenly green? But that's Disney logic. I can't complain that hard about it. So okay, I've bitched about the movie long enough. What do I like about it? Well, it's big. I mean, friggin' big. If you can see this movie on the big screen, see it. When Scar's paw comes down for the first time, it's just massive. I actually remember somebody in the audience going, whoa! On top of that, the characters aren't great, but they're good. James Earl Jones as Mufasa is a great leader, Jeremy Irons is over the top as the villain, but he's still pretty enjoyable. The hyenas are funny, Rowan Atkinson has a few good puns here and there. I'm not a huge fan of Timon and Pumbaa, but I stomach them okay. They get a laugh every once in a while. And even though the message is sort of botched, I like the message it's trying to get across. But like I said, what makes this film good is just the size of it. And it doesn't just come from the animation, it does come from the story. It's a big story. Like I said, it's basically a kid version of Hamlet, but they don't sugarcoat it that much. They don't pull a Bambi's mom where she dies off screen. No, you see the body. That was a big thing for kids back then. To have a death scene right in the middle of a big action-packed moment was pretty unexpected for Disney. At least at that time. So overall, I do like it. I do wish some of the other Disney films got more attention and made more money, but that doesn't mean the original film is bad. It's a big film with a pretty big story and a pretty big message. I just have my own personal issues with them. It's a movie I was glad to see several times in the theater, and chances are when they re-release it again, I'll go and check it out a few more times. So Disney was producing some of the biggest hits the world has ever seen. The Little Mermaid, a lot of people saw. Beauty and the Beast, most people saw. Aladdin, everybody saw. And The Lion King was the highest grossing animated film at that time. What could possibly go wrong for Disney? Yeah. Yes, Pocahontas seems to be that snowball that started the avalanche of downward spiraling Disney animated films. It wasn't a big critical disappointment or even that big a financial disappointment, but nobody praised it like they praised the other Disney films, especially the general public. Not just adults, but even kids found the whole idea of telling the story of the Indian princess to be, well, not that interesting. And the 2D Disney animated films would never quite hit the record-breaking numbers that they did with Lion King, Aladdin, and so forth after this came out. So, is it as bad as everybody made it out to be? Let's look at the good stuff. First of all, you gotta give Disney credit for trying something pretty different with this. I mean, for a company that mostly based its animated films on fairy tales and pop cultural references, this was a very different turn. Even the look of the film is different. The soft, smooth lines are not really as prominent, and look, even the eyes have really shrunken down. The characters don't look like the typical Barbie and Ken stereotypes that you get in most Disney films, but I think people kinda miss that. I think there's just something so jarring when your last human characters look like this and then suddenly they look like this. But hey, a more adult look is fine if there's a more adult story. And that is not at all what this is. I'm not even gonna try and talk about the history aspect of this, cause trust me, there's no point. They made most of it up. But that wouldn't matter as much if it was done well. But pretty much what we have is the typical greedy white guy comes to take over the native land. A story that adults, and especially kids, have heard over and over and over in after-school specials. Are they right? Yeah, but can you find a new way of telling it? I think a lot of us don't see the purpose in watching a story if we already know exactly what's gonna happen and pretty much how you're going to tell it. Okay, let's get to the technicals here. Our main lead is Pocahontas. She's strong, free-spirited, and dull as a rock. Yeah, I'm sorry, she's just not that interesting. I mean, I know she does things that the other princesses don't do, but her actions are one thing, her personality is something different. And she's not bad, she's just not that fun to watch. The only person to be more boring is John Smith, played by Mel Gibson. Him and his crew come across the Native Americans and decide they want to take over their land, which leads to teaching the white idiots a new point of view, constant misunderstandings that of course result in capture and death, and an evil bad guy who refuses to listen and just wants gold, gold, gold. It's your classic Who's the Savage story, which like I said, wouldn't be bad if they could do something new with it. And for those thinking that this was one of the first films to try it, it's not. Like I said, this stuff was in countless after-school specials and TV shows and all sorts of things geared towards kids, so this was really nothing that unexpected. One of the biggest complaints at the time is that the animals don't talk. And at first, I kinda like it. I like a little mime, silent school stuff where you don't hear them talk and it's all in the expressions. But then, when you really think about it, this is a film about communicating with nature. Why don't the animals talk? If there's any Disney movie where it actually makes sense to hear the animals speak, this is it. But if they don't want to make them talk, that's fine. Maybe they're communicating with nature in another way. Like, you know, talking to the trees. Wait a minute! The trees can talk, but the animals can't? What sense does that make? Yeah, I don't get it either, and it's a pretty silly choice. Now wait a minute, didn't I say I was going to talk about the good things in this movie? Because there are a few. Most of us know Colors of the Wind, and even though it's preachy, it's still a pretty decent song. I really like Savages, even though the lyrics at times are a little goofy. Another thing that's really cool about this movie is the colors. They look great. You sort of don't even see the lines, the colors just sort of take them over. Whoever did the artistic design really knew what they were doing. And once in a while you get some cute comic relief from the little animal friends, but aside from that, there's not much to talk about. Is it really awful? I suppose not. I mean, it's not doing anything god-awful apart from, you know, rewriting history, but hey, history already did that. And it's Disney, you expect them to take horrifying stories and change them around to have a happy ending. But Pocahontas' biggest crime is that it's dull and predictable. Not that Disney has always been unpredictable, but it's always been entertaining. Pocahontas is just a snore fest. Apart from looking at it, there's really not that much to have fun with. We already know what the lesson's gonna be, we already know what the characters are gonna discover, we already know their flaws, their strengths, their weaknesses, we already know who's gonna die, we already know who's gonna live, so why are we watching it? Well, a lot of people didn't. Like I said, this was the first film to start the sort of animated Disney downfall. And even though they'd still have some hits after it, none of them would ever reach the golden age that Disney hit a few years earlier. So while it's not awful, I can see why it started this downward spiral. Disney would need to have a truly ingenious idea for their next film to pull them out of it. The result? Well, join me in the next one. Disney really wanted to bounce back from some of the disappointment brought by Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame was probably not the best way to go. A story as well known and famously dark and twisted as Hunchback is probably not the best way to get a general audience coming back to you. But I'm sure by the time Pocahontas was done, Hunchback was already half done, and you just have to go with what you got. And for what they got, honestly, I really love this one. But that's a personal preference. To be very straightforward, the film does in fact have a lot of flaws, as you would probably assume it would. Hunchback is probably the last movie you would want to tell as a Disney family film. The original story by Victor Hugo was about the corruption of church and the overuse of power that it had. Here, it's mostly told as an ugly duckling story. And while that's done well, there's several parts that you feel were kind of forced.
A guy like you!
Oh god, we'll get to them in a minute. No, let's start with the story as is. In many respects, it's pretty similar to the book. A deformed hunchback lives in the bell tower of Notre Dame. He's looked after by a man named Frollo. In this version, he's portrayed as a judge. In the original, he was a priest. The hunchback, named Quasimodo, just wants to go out into the streets and be accepted like anyone else. And during the Festival of Fools, which is a celebration of the gypsies, he gets his chance. And not only is he accepted, but he's actually celebrated. People love how strange he looks and start having fun with him. Now in the original, he accidentally commits some sort of crime and is then punished for it, to which the gypsy Esmeralda pops up and tries to give him water. In this version, he doesn't commit a crime, the crowd just suddenly turns on him, pretty sporadically actually, to which again, Esmeralda goes up to save him. But it turns out Frollo has the hots for her and wants to do everything in his power to get her. Again, in the original, she's accused of a crime. Here, she's accused of witchcraft, which is really nothing more than their parlor tricks. So between Frollo wanting her, Quasimodo wanting her, and hey, did I mention there's a third guy named Phoebus who also is wanting her? It's a pretty complicated love square. Many other elements of the original story is there, like Quasimodo saving her, shouting sanctuary, people trying to break into Notre Dame, but it's sort of told out of order. It works here though, and it gives us all the famous scenes that we love to watch. So where does Hunchback fall flat? Well, I don't want to say fall flat, but there are times during the story where it feels a little forced. Like the animators really want to tell certain parts of the story, but then other times they put it in because they probably got a lot of notes about it. For example, the romance between Esmeralda and Phoebus is not very interesting. They just sort of crack one-liners at each other. But to be fair, they do set aside time in the story for them to fall in love. It's not like they just meet and boom, they're together. Also, the explanation of the gypsies, especially for a kid, I think is really complicated. If you had no idea what a gypsy is, this would probably confuse you more. They're said to be all thieves, and yet there's a festival celebrating them. Frollo vows to destroy them all, and yet he shows up to the festival. Esmeralda says that they're not all really thieves, but then they find their giant fortress where they stole all their shit. I guess you could argue that sort of shows the complications of the gypsy culture, but I don't know, I think it would just confuse kids more.
See that face?
And yeah, okay, let's talk about the gargoyles. God, I friggin' hate these things. Number 1, how dare you make Jason Alexander not funny? Shame on you. Number 2, the moral of the story is not to judge people by how they look. And yet that's constantly what they're doing!
I thought I was the cute one.
No, you're the fat, stupid one with the big mouth.
Again, bit of a mixed message. Third, as annoying as they are, I would give the movie credit if they were imaginary. And you know what? At first, it looks like they are. They don't just turn back to stone. There's a scene where they have a whole musical number and it appears that all the stuff they were showing before wasn't real. Like it was all in Quasimodo's mind. That's a great idea! I would honestly tolerate them if this was the thought going into it, that Quasimodo was just imagining them. What a great but also tragic way to get your comic relief in. But in the end, nope, they're real. They're fighting off the guards, they're helping him save the day. There's no way Quasimodo could imagine this. They just come to life. I won't question how, it's Disney magic, but come on, you can make these guys a lot less obnoxious. Okay, so that's all my bad stuff. Let's talk about the good stuff, because honestly, there's a lot. Let's talk about what everybody remembers, the villain. Oh, Frollo is such a badass, awesome villain. He does all the bastardly things that a lot of the other Disney villains do, but they actually make him complex, too. He tries to convince himself that he's a soldier for God, and yet he's constantly doing horrible things. But he tries to justify it every single time. I love it. That's a great character. Quasimodo is also very likable. That's Tom Hulce, the guy who did Amadeus, doing the voice. There's such a kindness to it, such a softness. And even though his singing voice isn't technically that great, there's still so much heart and passion put into it that you don't care. It sounds wonderful.
Up there, strolling by the sand.
Songs are very different, for the most part. You have your heartfelt song, you have your comedy song, but then you have the intro song and the Hellfire song. This does what musicals are supposed to do, tell you how the person is feeling and also explain the story in musical form. That is the purpose of a musical, and you know what? They do it great here. That choir is awesome. It makes everything seem so much more gigantic. And speaking of which, the film is gigantic. I mean, look at it. It's just huge. For all the problems that the movie has, you can see why they made it. Notre Dame looks unbelievable. The shadows, the colors, the angles. Much like Bambi, the sheer look of this film makes everything seem so much grander and much more important. And give the movie credit. For Disney, this was very ballsy. It's not necessarily going after the church, well, let's face it, they never get away with that. But it is sort of touching on issues of faith and good and evil, heaven and hell. God, even lust. The scene where an old man sniffs the young woman's hair, I couldn't believe I was watching that. This is a Disney flick? Sex especially is a big no-no in Disney, and to see some of this imagery come out was really kind of shocking. But personally, I never thought they went too far with it. It fit. Kids can see the good and thoughtful, loving relationships, but they can also see the bad and just mindless, vengeful lust. And there's also the issue of heartbreak. The main character doesn't get the woman. Yeah, I don't think I'm giving anything away when I say that. But at the same time, he's accepted among the crowd and is able to start a new life. As Disney films go, it's one of the darkest, and probably took the most risks. And for the most part, it pays off. The changes to the story I actually don't mind so much because for the most part, it does flow pretty well. At times, it's a little clunky, but again, this is a very hard adaptation to pull off. In fact, I'm really amazed they pulled it off as well as they did. I know technically, from a character and storytelling point of view, it's not the strongest, and for Disney to fully make a version like this work, it either had to be more simpler or just go balls out and tell the entire story. You know, screw the kids. But you sort of know that's not gonna happen, in the same way you know they're not gonna kill the Little Mermaid in The Little Mermaid. So personally, I really love this one. It's one of my favorites. I don't care if it's clunky, I don't care if it has problems. The stuff that works really well works unbelievably well, and it sticks with you. If you're a big fan of the original Victor Hugo book, you're probably not gonna like this version. But if you just say the title, Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I think most people can know what to expect. And honestly, I think it's a little better than what most people expect. The audience for it is growing more and more, and I'm really glad to see that, because I don't think it was a huge hit when it came out. I don't blame them. After Pocahontas, Disney was just starting to become a little unpopular. And like I said, something this controversial was probably not the film to get audiences back in. But for what it is, it's a personal fave. It took chances, threw a lot of effort into it, I've seen it a million times, and I'll probably see it a million more. Alright, so Pocahontas was sort of the beginning of the downfall of people's interest in Disney animated movies. Hunchback didn't exactly help. Hercules fucking killed it. This is one of the most confusing, oddly put together, God, I don't even want to say Disney films, just films in general. The choices they make to tell this story, or stories, is just so mind-boggling. Nothing about it makes sense. It's sort of like the Mad Libs of Disney films. The musical accompaniment is gonna be gospel. Okay. The designer of the movie is gonna be Scarface, the guy who did The Wall. Okay. The look and tone of the movie is going to be Las Vegas. What? And the singer of the main song is going to be Michael Bolton. Oh, you are dead to me, movie. Yeah, I don't know what the mindset was. Maybe they just wanted to try something so different to sort of get him out of a ditch, but man, does it backfire. Okay, well, let's talk about the story. It's Greek mythology. You got all the gods up on Mount Olympus, and Zeus is happy because of the birth of his son, Hercules. But Lord Hades, the ruler of the underworld, wants to see his son get destroyed because he's apparently going to stop him from taking over everything in the future. So he gives him a potion that takes away his godly powers. It's interesting. And much like Superman, Hercules is raised among people. But again, just like Superman, he finds out that his father is a god among men and that he himself has supernatural powers. And just like Superman, he goes to save the day wherever he can with his incredible strength. And just like Superman, you seeing a pattern here? He falls in love with a snarky woman who constantly has to be saved. But once Hades finds out that Hercules is alive, he tries to use the woman, named Megara, to seduce him and take away his powers. Hades uses her as bait to try and get him to lure his powers away, and that's exactly what he does, leaving Hades to take over the land and Hercules to try and stop him however he can. I guess in many respects, the comparisons to superheroes shouldn't shock me. I mean, it is sort of where the origin of superheroes came from, Greek mythology. But like I said, it's the choices they make and the way they tell this story that just really makes it odd. Hercules is not very interesting. We've seen this idiot before. He's not very bright, but he's got a good heart. He'll fall for whatever stupid plan you put in front of him, but gosh, he's just so wide-eyed you can't help but feel sorry for him. Megara is sassy, but that's about it. There's not really much to her after that. Yeah, they tried to give her a pass, but she's still not that interesting. She's just a few one-liners and a sneer. And speaking of which, that's exactly what the teacher is too. Danny DeVito plays Danny DeVito. Yeah, he's the trainer, he's Mickey from the Rocky movies, and again, there's nothing new to him. Except for the fact that it's in Greek mythology, but why would we want to see that? The only thing that's kind of entertaining is James Woods as Hades, because, well, again, it's one of the weird, odd choices that I guess sort of works to its advantage. I mean, how strange that this guy doesn't talk like a traditional villain. He talks much more like a lawyer or an agent.
So I would be eternally grateful if you would just take a day off. We dance, we kiss, we schmooze, we carry on, we go home happy. What do you say? Come on.
He's funny, but he's not enough to save the movie. And all the other side characters are just totally forgettable. I love Scarface's work, but here it's really not used well. In something like The Wall, it really shines because his work is so different and strange. In a movie about Greek mythology, maybe it could work, but not the way they're telling it. This isn't Greek mythology, this is the Excalibur Casino tells you the story of Greek mythology. The songs, I don't remember a one. I barely even remember parts where they did sing. So what were they thinking when they put this together? The only thing I can contemplate is that maybe they were trying to go for something similar to what they did with Aladdin. I mean, like I said before, Aladdin was sort of Arabia meets Vegas. But that worked because the colors were so good, the designs were so good, and there was still chemistry between the two main characters. It sort of knew who it was trying to please, and it had enough of a broad scope to reach a general audience. This does not. Not to say that it doesn't have its fans, I'm sure it does. But I don't know, when you look at statues and sculptures of Hercules and then you think Disney animation bringing that to life, this isn't what I think of. Which is fine if it was better or an entertaining alternative, but it's really not. It's clumsy, it's flawed, the story is so recycled, the characters are so recycled, and not just from other Disney films, but other tire cliches as well. This is definitely one of my least favorites. Maybe if it wanted to go full force into straight up satire of the Hercules stories, which I'm not saying would necessarily work, but that's the only way I can see these choices making sense. But when you still have to have a villain who's intimidating, a hero who's likable, a romance you're supposed to believe, and, well, actual suspense in the climax, you can't do this here and expect people to be that invested. Like I said, I hear it's growing a bit of a fan base, but I probably won't be able to. It's just a little too weird and clumsy. Mulan, when it first came out, was a modest hit. Critics seemed to like it okay, and audiences seemed to like it okay. And even today, that seems to be the general consensus. People seem to like it okay. And yeah, I guess I'm on the same boat, but I think I like it and dislike it for different reasons everybody else does. What's the story? A long time ago in China, we have the Huns invading. So an army has to be put together and one male from every house has to go and fight. The only problem is the father of a teenage girl named Mulan is too old and too sick to fight. So she disguises herself as a boy and goes to fight for him. She's accompanied by a Chinese dragon played by Eddie Murphy. Yeah, wasn't that fitting casting? And while she has a hard time fitting in, she does eventually win over the crowd, never letting on to her secret. Okay, so what do people in general really like about this movie? Well, they like the girl power aspect. They like the fact that such a strong female lead, that she goes out, she flings a sword, she fights her battle, she does all this good stuff. And that'd be great if she was a little bit more interesting. I don't want to say she's a bore because she's not totally forgettable, but again, I just feel like I've seen this character before. She's the free spirit that everybody tells should be one thing, but she wants to be something else. She can't do the one thing that everybody tells her to do, so she wants to go into something unconventional. And, wouldn't you know it, that unconventional thing changes everybody's perception. Again, not a bad moral, I've just seen it. And her character seems much more tied to the moral than it does an actual character. What pulls her through are the scenes where she's trying to be a boy, but we'll get to that in a second. People like Eddie Murphy as Mushu. Yeah, I don't. He seemed really out of place, I didn't laugh that much at him, and I don't know, I didn't see a character, I just saw Eddie Murphy doing the voice of a cartoon. In something like Shrek, it makes a little bit more sense. This is just the kind of world it is. In Chinese history, this doesn't seem to fly very well. Though to be fair, he does get a good line every once in a while.
There are a couple of things I know they're bound to notice.
People like the Chinese culture. I think it's kind of underplayed. Again, it's kind of like Hercules, just when you think Disney animation is going to tackle this, you get really excited in what they can do. And aside from a few backgrounds and one or two designs, it's pretty glanced over. I guess Chinese art in many ways does celebrate the white space, but I think there's a better way to show it off. There's a lot of great Chinese art and I'd like to see it explored more. And then of course you have the villain. I'm not sure if people like this guy or not, but in my opinion, I think he is the most forgettable villain ever put in Disney. I don't remember a thing about this guy. His design is boring, his dialogue is boring, what he does is boring. This is a fierce warrior who burns down villages, and yet I can't remember one line out of him. The only thing I remember is that the color in his eyes was reversed, which I didn't really get. There's black where the white should be, and yellow where the black should be, and I don't know. If that's the most memorable thing about him, that's probably not a good sign. Also, I don't like the fact that the ancient Chinese ancestors, again, giving some kids some real culture into this history, is done more like a meeting at the old folks' home. I mean, I know it's supposed to be played for laughs, but I just didn't find it that funny. Again, when you think Disney animation and Chinese ghosts, you think of something really spectacular, but this just sort of seems like a throwaway. Bitch and moan, bitch and moan. What do I like about this movie? Honestly, I like the comedy. I know it sounds weird seeing how I just bashed Eddie Murphy and the ancestor ghost people, but I like everything else. I like the side characters. I like this army. I like how they poke fun of gender roles. I like her attempts of trying to fit in. I like everybody trying to act tough but failing miserably. For me, the side characters is what makes this movie. particularly the army themselves. I love these guys. I love the guy who's prone to anger. I love the one who's kind of a pacifist. I love the other one who's kind of a show-off. I love the pencil pusher that everybody makes fun of. And like I said, when Mulan tries to blend in, it's really hilarious. I actually think there's a lot of subtlety to this humor too. Like, have you ever noticed when the one guy wanted to shake hands, she accidentally hands it to him like she's expecting him to kiss it? That's really kind of subtle. Plus, the comedic expressions are great, and just how quick they are.
Oh, hi, guys. I didn't know you were here. I was just washing, so now I'm clean, and I'm gonna go. Bye-bye.
Though at times, I have to admit, some of the gender issues get a little too weird. Like when all the guys are whistling at the women in the fields, and then Mulan tries to cover her face while they laugh. I don't know, is that a little too odd? Maybe I'm just overreading it. For the most part, they're played pretty funny. But again, it's not just the comedy that makes me enjoy it, it's the army in general. I like the camaraderie, I like the individuals, I like that they try to work with one another, I like that they anger each other, I like that they make each other laugh, and I like Mulan trying to blend in with them. For me, that's where the heart of the movie is. So like I said before, I think it's okay. It's certainly not one of the stronger Disney films, and I think it certainly could have been a lot more, but for what it is, it's got some good scenes. I remember liking it enough that I did sit down to watch it again, which is more than I can say for some of the other Disney films I think are merely okay. So in my opinion, it's worth at least one viewing. I wouldn't expect a whole lot of culture, but I would expect just the right amount of entertainment. When I heard Disney's next animated feature was going to be Tarzan, I remember thinking to myself, yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, it is a pretty well-known subject matter, and it does lend itself to animation. And at the same time, I was wondering if it might have the same impact that Robin Hood had, you know, where people would actually be introduced to it through the Disney version as opposed to other forms of media. I saw the trailers and got really excited for it, and when it came out, a lot of it exceeded my expectations, while other parts, I thought were kind of mediocre. Okay, well let's jump right in. A family is shipwrecked on an island and they find they have to live on their own. But unfortunately, a cheetah comes and kills the parents, leaving only the baby behind. Coincidentally, the exact same cheetah kills the child of an ape family. And, wouldn't you know it, they happen to bump into each other. So the mother ape decides she wants to look after the child, but the father ape is not quite as positive. So, growing up, the little boy Tarzan has to not only win out his friends, who he seems to be an outcast in front of, but also his father, who seems to want nothing to do with him. Once he grows into a man, he comes across some more people. A hunter named Clayton, a bumbling old professor, and his daughter named Jane. Jane and Tarzan immediately start to hit it off. And Jane starts to show him all about the human world, while he starts to show her all about the animal world. The romance is born, and of course an evil villain is discovered. Okay, so what's good about the movie? Well, the animation. I mean, yeah, look at it. What they can do with Tarzan is unbelievable. Before this, people would just associate him with swinging around on vines, but look at this, he's practically surfing the trees. That's really creative. Tarzan himself is a pretty decent character. I mean, he does all the stuff you want him to do. He snarls, he sneers, he roars. But he does have those big puppy dog eyes, and he does manage to be sentimental at certain moments. Jane is my example of a damsel in distress done right. I mean, yeah, not every character has to be strong, not every character has to be wielding a sword, but they have to at least be interesting. And Jane, despite the fact that she has to be saved all the time, is interesting. She's polite, but she's eccentric. She's clumsy, but she's got a good heart. And it sort of makes sense that she'd have to be saved all the time. I mean, she's out of her environment, and this is very much how women were like at that time period. But she still contributes in being the education for Tarzan and also the emotional center. So yeah, I think she's a fun character. Rosie O'Donnell is an ape, and yeah, I won't say ideal casting, cause let's face it, everybody else already has. And while she is annoying, she's not as annoying as she could have been. Clayton, and I don't think I'm giving anything away here, is obviously the bad guy. He's kinda like Gaston, except minus any of the comedy or charm. He's not very interesting, and his motivation is as boring as the Disney motivations get. It's just greed. It's the Pocahontas villain all over again. The motivation is boring, he's boring, it slows everything down. The rest of the side characters are kinda forgettable, but to be fair, they keep the focus where it should be, on Tarzan. The songs are by Phil Collins. Wait, what? Phil Collins? What does he have to do with Disney, or Jungles, or anything like that? Well, okay, maybe he'll write some good songs for the characters to sing. Oh, no, they're not singing at all. He's just singing the songs, right the fuck out of nowhere. Every time he starts singing, I expect all the animals to start looking around saying, what the fuck is that? Sometimes the orchestrations around the songs can be nice, but the actual songs themselves, they don't do a thing for me at all. I guess he sort of sings about what's going on, but kind of in the same way that, hey, this can be played on the radio as well. It's all too vague. If the song's not totally invested in what it's singing about, then why should we? But I think my main issue with the movie is the conflict that Tarzan is going through. Which, don't get me wrong, it is there, and it is addressed. And they do take time out of the movie to look at it. But I just wish they took more time. I was kind of thinking to myself, wow, Disney animation and the turmoil of Tarzan, what they can do with this. Half man, half animal. I mean, there's so many different variations you can do with animation. I guess I was sort of thinking of something along the lines of Hellfire, like visually showing the turmoil that the person is going through, as well as in musical form. You know, as opposed to Phil Collins singing, Tarzan's here, Oh, wait, no, not Tarzan, because that'd be too specific. I'm feeling something that this character's feeling too, Fuck Phil Collins. But instead, it's sort of fighting for room with the comic relief and the villain and again the Phil Collins songs, and I don't know. I guess I just want much more of that to be the focus. Even the romance between Tarzan and Jane could have been explored a little bit more. I mean, I guess it works alright, but again, it feels like they're trying to squeeze in too much that's not totally needed. Like his childhood, you could have really gone into him trying to fit in, and yeah, they do, but it's mostly played for laughs. I like the scene where he tries to cover himself in mud and turn himself into an ape, but that's only for a few seconds. And the same thing when he meets Jane for the first time. He takes off her glove, touches a human hand for the first time, and it's a nice scene. But again, it's only a few seconds. I guess I wanted more of his internal struggle to take up the majority of the film, but then again, it is Disney. I mean, I can't expect all the characters to be like Frollo and Hunchback of Notre Dame. I mean, maybe I'm just getting spoiled. It's just this thought that Disney wants to get better and better, and in many respects they are. So when a Disney film doesn't take advantage of a really great opportunity, especially when it looks like you only have one shot at it, it's kind of a letdown. Especially when it's just thrown away to the same greedy plot device that the villain provides. You know what? They're in the jungle. Why do they need a villain? Everything's already trying to get them. In fact, why didn't they make the cheetah the villain? He's the one that killed a kid, a pair of parents. Why couldn't they make that like a Shere Khan type villain? That would have been so much more interesting. But again, I'm probably trying to see it for what I want it to be as opposed to what it is. For what it is, it's good. The animation has some great moments. I do like our two main characters. And there is actually time set aside for character development, just not as much as I would like. On the whole, Tarzan is a good flick to check out. So the next time you see it on DVD, give it a rent. You'll probably enjoy it. Well, the sequel to one of my favorite films of all time has finally come out, Fantasia 2000. This is what Walt Disney originally wanted to do. He wanted to continue the Fantasia legacy by having new movies come out. But since the first one didn't do so hot, they decided to scrap that idea. However, the popularity for Fantasia kept building, and they decided to finally do a sequel years later. It's fantastic, it's brilliant, it's stupid and lame. It's new and inspiring. It's old and's been done. It's a creative, magical experience. It's a complete sellout by every means of the word. So, as you can imagine, my emotions run pretty high with this movie. But, in keeping with the Disney tradition, the stuff that's good is really, really good. I guess the best way to go about it is just to talk about the segments. It starts off with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and they're trying to do what they did with the first film by having the abstract art try to match the music. At times it does, but for the most part, it's trying to tell a story. Like how there's this mama butterfly and this baby butterfly, and they try to get away from these evil black butterflies, and yeah, if it's trying to go abstract, why are you trying to put a coherent narrative to it? And on top of that, sometimes the coherent narrative doesn't match the music, so it doesn't even work in that sense. But it's got a few good visuals in there. Next we have The Pines of Rome with the flying whales. This is awesome. The CG makes the size and weight of the whales just look gigantic. It matches the music perfectly, and on top of that, it just builds and builds at the end. In fact, this probably would have been better as the last one, but, you know, what can you do? The story of the Tin Soldier is okay, though like most Disney films, they change the ending around. It matches the music and manages to be a cute little fairy tale. Rhapsody in Blue is a new take, not only in music, but in style, too. They take sort of an Al Hirschfeld style to the whole thing, and Yeah, it works really well. It matches the music nice, and it's good to see Disney try something new, especially with Fantasia. The flamingo with a yo-yo... Yeah, just say that out loud. There's a flamingo with a yo-yo that's the focus of one of the musical segments in a Fantasia movie. Well, you can guess my problem. It's cute, but really, you could see that on Tiny Toons or something. It doesn't seem like Fantasia related. They replay The Sorcerer's Apprentice, that's always fun. And then we get Donald's Ark, which again, is funny and cute, but let's face it, every time you hear that music, you're gonna think of graduation, and it's kinda distracting. It gets a few laughs though, so I guess it works fine. And the last one is the Firebird Suite. Again, some of Disney's best animation here. Mixing some of their classic style of animation, but also mixing some new stuff. Is it me, or does that sprite look very anime-ish? Well, this one matches the music great, it looks great, and it's a nice finale. Though, again, the whales would have been a little better, but I'm just nitpicking. Unfortunately, we also have celebrity appearances. That's Steve Martin, probably at his worst.
Could I have my violin, please? Ah, thank you. All right, boys, let's... Oh, sorry. Could I have another stick thingy, please?
We also have Bette Midler, James Earl Jones, Angela Lansbury, Penn and Teller. Oh, for God's sake, Penn and Teller? Really? That's like when they invited Beavis and Butthead to the Oscars. Just something doesn't seem right here. Some of them can add a little bit of class and dignity, but most of them are just spending time either congratulating what a great movie it is, even before it's done, and the rest of them are just making really painful jokes.
Oh, and camera back on me. Camera back on me.
Yeah, the look on that woman's face says it all. The original Fantasia had a dignity to it, like they were gonna treat the audience seriously, like, hey, this was for adults, we're not gonna talk down to you. This is some of the greatest music ever written, we worked really hard on this, and we're gonna treat it that way. Here, it's right, Steve Martin!
Could I have another stick thingy, please?
So, on the whole, Fantasia 2000 is pretty hit and miss. But to be honest, the only major miss would probably be the celebrities. I can't think of any musical segments where I was just like, wow, that was awful. I mean, even the ones that aren't very good are just not very good by Fantasia standards. But they're still fine on their own. And as I said before, the stuff that's good is incredibly good. This is some of Disney's best animation in years. It allows them to just be creative, do what they want, just let the animation breathe. There's a sense that there wasn't as many limitations to this, and you know what? It really does show half the time. The other half, not so much. So honestly, despite its flaws, I still highly recommend it. Is it the first film? No. Do any of them meet the power or seriousness of the first film? No. But some of them do come close. Overall, I really like it. Yeah, I hate sitting through the celebrities and some of the other musical segments as much as you do, but the payoff is just too good of a payoff. I say definitely check it out. Just have the fast forward button on standby. When I saw the previews for The Emperor's New Groove, I just said, okay, I'm done. No more Disney, they have clearly given up. What, David Spade is a llama? Really? This is your movie? These are the people that brought us Snow White and Sleeping Beauty and The Lion King and David Spade as a llama? No, just no. But after years and years of everybody telling me, you gotta see The Emperor's New Groove, you gotta see The Emperor's New Groove, I finally broke down and I put it on. And better than I thought, but I don't know if that makes it good. At least not for me. Well, okay, let's talk about it. David Spade plays an emperor that's totally full of himself and a complete jerk. So an evil sorceress and her bumbling sidekick try to put him out of his misery and take control of the crown. But they accidentally slip him a potion that turns him into a llama instead of killing him, and, well, they try to kill him anyway. But the sidekick messes up and accidentally lets him get away. So the llama comes across a peasant played by John Goodman. As you'd imagine, they don't get along, they backstab one another, and yeah, it's pretty much a buddy-buddy comedy. Do I even need to say what's gonna happen in the end? They're gonna go on their road trip, they're gonna become friends, they're gonna figure out something about one another, and of course they're gonna defeat the bad guys. I guess what people really like about this movie is all the adult humor and fourth wall jokes. and I guess a good chunk of the time they do work. I mean, I can't think of any jokes where I was just smacking my head saying, oh god, really? They said that? But I can also think of many jokes where I didn't laugh that hard. It's probably no secret I'm not a big fan of David Spade, and yeah, I'd be lying if I said I liked him a lot here, but much like Rosie O'Donnell and Tarzan, he's not that annoying. John Goodman is John Goodman. Yeah, just sort of his typical nice guy, you know, it works, but I've seen it before. The side characters, I guess, are just the people they come across on their journeys, and I don't remember too many of them, but again, I don't remember any of them being super annoying. Honestly, I just don't want to see Disney do a buddy-buddy road trip movie. I mean, it's Disney. I'm expecting great big grand things. Or if they are going to do a comedy, a great big grand comedy. If you want to see a buddy-buddy road trip movie from them, that's fine. But when I hear Disney, I think grand animation. I think the best of the best. Not David Spade as a llama. So really, I think everything in this movie is just kind of okay. With the exception of one element. The villains. Eartha Kitt and Patrick Warburton are friggin' hilarious. They make this movie. Every scene with them makes me laugh and makes me laugh hard. It's such a peculiar team up, but you know what? It really works. The voices, the expressions, and especially the animation on them are just wonderful. In fact, that's something that I should bring up. The animation in this, as far as comedy goes, is really, really good. The timing's really fast and the line work is really good, so I will give the film credit for that. But like I said, the only thing that really stands out for me are the villains. In fact, I really wish the movie was just about the two of them. But as is, it's just your typical buddy-buddy road trip movie, like I said. And if you're looking for a Disney version of that, I guess you'll like this fine, but it doesn't do much for me. Like I said, not as bad as I thought, but just nothing spectacular for me. Atlantis: The Lost Empire. This was Disney's attempt to try and be a little bit more adult in that they're trying to make an action film where people die and big explosions happen and all that cool stuff to try to get back with the hip audience again. And boy, did it backfire. Not only did the film do incredibly poorly at the box office, but critics really ripped it a new one. I mean, it seemed like nobody liked this movie at all. Were the criticisms right? Yeah, but I don't know. I think there's some good stuff in it. Kinda, sorta. Alright, let's look at the story. Michael J. Fox is Milo, a janitor at a museum. But it turns out he has a journal that could possibly lead to the lost civilization of Atlantis, which of course, nobody believes him on. That is except for one man who used to be a friend of his family. It turns out he believes Milo and has been spending years and years putting together a team and equipment to go down and actually find it. Of course, they come across trouble, obstacles, and all sorts of bad things trying to get in the way until they finally find the city and the lost people. They come across the Emperor and his daughter named Kita, and they try to figure out the ways of the culture and civilization. As it turns out, the culture and civilization themselves have forgotten it. That's sort of an interesting idea. Okay, so it sort of sounds like 20,000 Leagues meets Indiana Jones meets, well, Disney. There is a lot of action, there is a lot of adventure, but at the same time, yeah, you do have to mix it with Disney, don't you? And if you're trying to get more of an adult crowd, that's probably not the best thing to do. Like, listen to this line and tell me if you think this is more Indiana Jones or Disney.
Alright, this is it! We're gonna rescue the princess! We're gonna save Atlantis! Or we're gonna die trying! Now let's do it!
Yeah, I'd say Disney too. On top of that, guess who the villain is? That's right, some asshole who just wants money. Oh, for God's sake, you're looking for a lost civilization. You're gonna be rich either way. But no, they want to destroy the people and just take the artifact so it's worth even more money. Oh, give me a break. I am so sick of these guys. But what does work about the movie? Well, the culture is pretty cool, the people are pretty cool, the sort of magical elements are pretty cool. And on top of that, I really like the side characters. They're all very unique, very funny, they all stand out, and they have some really good lines. I'd be lying if I said the problems I listed before didn't get in the way, and yeah, on the whole, is it a good movie? Probably not, but I think this is sort of for me what Moulin Rouge is for a lot of other people. A guilty pleasure. The stuff that's good, I think is really good and really holds up. Is it corny at times? Oh yeah. Is it really stupid? Pfft, you have no idea. But look at this scene. opinion, there's more here to make it just a style over substance. I mean, the culture is pretty interesting, the people are pretty interesting, the designs are pretty interesting, and like I said, I do like a lot of these characters. In fact, it's one of the few times you have a Disney couple that doesn't get married. Heck, they don't even kiss, they just give a hug. Dude, that's rare. But the problems are major ones, and they can be very, very distracting, and can ruin the film for a lot of people. It didn't for me. Okay, it came close, but the stuff that's good, I really enjoy. I'm sure it has its fans, I'm sure it has its haters. You can just put me in the fan category. I really liked it, despite its annoyances. It's not perfect, but I had a lot of fun watching it. Every once in a while you come across that movie that's supposed to be one thing, but it does one element so well that it actually almost works against it. Lilo and Stitch is one of those movies. The story is very basic. An alien experiment from another galaxy escapes his captivity, makes his way to Earth, and befriends a little girl named Lilo. The other aliens try to get him back while they also learn the meaning of family, blah 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 blah. You can guess it very quickly. I remember when I saw the trailers for this movie and I was thinking to myself, I sort of already know this story. It's kind of E.T.-ish, meets hiding a pet, meets family bonding. I know it. So I basically avoided it. But much like The Emperor's New Groove, everybody was telling me to see it. So I finally went, rented it, sat down and watched it. And here's what stuck out to me. The stuff with the little girl is unbelievable. This is probably one of the best kid characters of all time. And for Disney to accomplish that, that's really something. Their kid characters have ranged from okay to incredibly annoying and incredibly bland. But this character, she's weird, she's violent, she's bizarre, she's emotional, she's kooky, she's totally out of control. Hey, guess what? Those are kids! It just so happens she's even more stranger than the rest of the crowd, so that makes her even more interesting. God, Disney finally got this right! But it doesn't just stop there. Oh, what? Is there an evil mother or an evil step something or other that doesn't understand her or something? No, it's actually a very believable situation. Lilo has to live with her older sister because the parents sadly passed away. But the older sister has trouble looking out for her because she's constantly in between jobs, has to look after a kid that's already a handful, and on top of that, she's her older sister, not her parent. So this is new territory for both of them, and it's hard for them to both get used to it. There's a man from an agency who's constantly watching them, making sure that Lilo's sister is a good parent. But even then, he's not the bad guy, he's just doing his job. And at times, he sees the tragedy of the situation too. And that's what this is, a tragedy. It's just a really bad turn of events that creates a really bad situation. It doesn't need a bad guy, it doesn't need a greedy villain, it's just life. It's the first time I thought Disney really got that, and they really captured it. And for me, this is bringing their animated features to a whole new level. But sadly, the film is not entirely about that. It's also about the alien. And that stuff is just okay. It's not bad, it's not great, it's just decent. The alien's cute, I guess. They have to sort of train him like a dog, and of course he learns the meaning of family just as they learn the meaning of family. I know it. It gets a few laughs, and the friendship between the two of them is relatively strong. It's just, oh man, I wish the movie was just about the sister and Lilo. And when you constantly had to be pulled back to the sci-fi alien chase, it sort of disappoints you. Well, me, I should say. But like I said, it's not bad, it just turns out they did one element way too well. But to be fair, that's better than having the whole film just be mediocre. And much like Tarzan, I shouldn't analyze what I want it to be as much as what it is. And for what it is really good. The animation is great. Like I said, these two characters are great. The aliens, they're okay. I mean, I guess you do sort of grow to like Stitch, and some of the side characters get a few giggles. The backgrounds actually return to watercolor backgrounds. That's really rare for Disney. Yeah, it was sort of a nice comeback. It was also nice that it took place in Hawaii, again, trying to get sort of a different location. So on the whole, it is a good movie. There's just some parts that are so much better than others, and I really would have liked to have seen that explored a little bit more. But it's still a good flick, and the stuff that stands out is really fantastic. The aliens are okay, but the sisters are more than worth the price of admission. Treasure Planet. Just saying that name sounds kind of silly. And I'm not gonna lie, that's sort of the major issue I have with this movie. It's Treasure Island, only we're not telling it like most people tell Treasure Island, we're telling it in space. In the future, but the spaceships aren't really spaceships, they're water ships, but the people are dressed futuristically, at least some of them, the ones not wearing bonnets, and... Okay, let's start from the beginning. A young Jim Hawkins hears about the legend of buried treasure. Only like we said before, it's not at Treasure Island, it's on Treasure Planet. Years go by and Jim Hawkins, it turns out, is now a delinquent, always getting in trouble and feeling bad that his father left. Wow, is that really in a Disney film? No car accident, no tragic death, he actually just up and left. Wow, that's actually pretty rare. Well, anyway, his mother has a hard enough time trying to raise him while also trying to look after a restaurant. But all that changes when he comes across a treasure map, or treasure sphere, whatever, that apparently shows them the location of Treasure Planet. He comes across one of his mother's friends called Dr. Doppler, and he recommends that they find a ship and go looking for the treasure. The mother kind of bizarrely agrees, and thus Jim and Doppler are off on adventure. The captain this time around is a cat lady. No, I don't mean she likes cats, I mean literally she's half cat, half lady. Played by Emma Thompson. The cook is John Silver, played by Brian Murray. And he also comes across a few other little friends, like this little glob of goo named Morph, a robot voiced by Martin Short, and all sorts of other weird oddities. Okay, so what's good about the movie? Because actually there are a lot of good things about it. First of all, it gets down what I think really any Disney film should get down first, the relationships with the characters. For example, the relationship between Hawkins and his mother is great. The relationship between him and John Silver is great. The relationship between Doppler and the captain is great. And to the film's credit, the reason the relationships are so great is because, well, the characters are pretty darn good too. Hawkins is sort of your generic rebellious hero, but at the same time, they do leave it open for people to leave impressions on him. He will absorb what people are telling him, and that's a good trait for a character. The captain is a lot of fun. She's very dignified, very intelligent, but she's also a fast talker and likes to show off. Doppler at times can get annoying, and yeah, I'm not a fan of the Martin Short robot, but he's not in it for that long. John Silver is great, as the character should be, both being diabolical but also having a soft side for Hawkins. So, okay, it seems to follow the book pretty well, the characters are strong. What's actually wrong with this film? This seems like the most important stuff. Well, as I said before, it's the setting. Why is this set in the future? Okay, let me put it this way. You can set it in the future, that's fine, but go all out. If you want to show us spaceships, show us spaceships, some cool looking ones. When you just have giant boats in space, that's all we're gonna see. You have futuristic parasailing in the sky, but then you also have people in 19th century dress. Honestly, it's just distracting. Sometimes it really works, like all the mechanics on John Silver. Instead of just having a fake leg, he has a fake arm, a fake eye, and all of it's technologically advanced. That's pretty cool. I just wish the rest of the movie went that far. Instead of trying to create this world that they just wanted to create on its own, they kept trying to combine it with what was popular, what was advanced, and then what was also sort of true of the time period the book was written. And that just sort of turns out a cluttered mess. And I don't think it's a pet peeve because it's constantly distracting. I'm always asking, how do these two things go together? These are two totally different time periods that really have almost nothing to do with one another. You can borrow some things, but this is really weird. On top of that, the same way that something like Oliver and Company felt very manipulative, you know, like half the visuals was something a marketing agent came up with, yeah, you feel that throughout the entire movie. I mean, it opens with sky surfing. All I could think of was that opening in the Power Rangers movie where they go sky surfing too. It's like, really? Look, you can relate with Jim Hawkins. He's doing cool stuff. Ooh! He wears a short black jacket. He has a cool haircut. He's got a ponytail. Rad! He goes to his mother who looks like something out of Moby Dick. Wait, what? So yeah, I wasn't on board with the idea. I constantly felt like I was being manipulated. And really, I wanted to see Disney do Treasure Island. No gimmicks, no whatever's cool at the time. Just tell Treasure Island. So I guess my final sum up is when they do tell Treasure Island, it's good. And when they try to do something cool and hip, it's lame. Sometimes the sci-fi designs are neat, but mostly it's just distracting. I don't know, if you can look at these visuals and they don't bother you, in fact you actually find yourself getting into it, you'll probably like this movie fine. For me, it just constantly took me out of it. And I would have liked to have seen the original source material really come to life as told by Disney. but it's not horrible. It's not even really that bad. I could just never get into it as much as the movie wants me to get into it. Hopefully you can draw your own conclusions and you can see if this movie is worth your time. When I agreed to do Disneycember, Brother Bear was one of the films I was looking the least forward to reviewing. Okay, not the least, but we'll get to that one later. I remember seeing the trailers for it and just looking incredibly uninterested, and yeah, I guess everybody else did because the film apparently didn't do very well. Well, I sat down, I watched it, and I have to say, at first, I was friggin' blown away by it. The people were likable, and the myths were likable. All I was saying to myself was, holy smokes, this is what Pocahontas should have been. I was getting invested in these characters. I was getting invested in what happened to them. One character passes away very early on, and you know what? I was really sort of torn up about it. The music was nice, the animation was nice, I was totally digging it. And then our main character turns into a bear. This is where it all goes downhill. Okay, let me clarify. I have no problem with the main character turning into a bear to learn a lesson. In fact, I was actually against it when I heard about it, but seeing where they were going with everything, I was actually pretty excited now. They handled everything else so well, I wanted to see what they were gonna do with this. What they do with it is about as predictable and boring and lame as you can imagine. You see, the spirit of the mountain, or something like that, takes the body of a young man who's looking for revenge on a bear and actually turns him into a bear. Well, he of course wants to turn back to human and comes across some colorful characters along the way. One of them is a little cub named Coda. He hangs around him for a bit because apparently he got separated from his mother. Well, gee, I wonder what happened to the mother. I won't give anything away, but let's just say something happened to the mother. And you'll be really dumbfounded that throughout this entire film, the main character never figures out what happened to the mother. And throughout the whole film, the bear is trying to get to the top of the mountain to figure out how to change himself back. All the while, his human brother is trying to track down and kill the bear because he wants vengeance too. So in a clever bit of writing, there's no real villain, there's just a great big misunderstanding. The brother wants to kill the bear for a reason we can all understand. He wants revenge for his brother. And while of course we see it's misled, we can sense the passion and the love that he had for his brother, hence why he's going to such violent needs. In fact, this whole story turned out to be a pretty good setup. It had a good beginning and it had a good ending. But like I said, the middle is where the problem comes from. When the animals have to talk, it's pretty annoying. The language the humans had for the most part is pretty timeless, but here, the animals say stuff like dude, and I spy, and they pinky swear, and do all sorts of other modern things that people do. And I'm sorry, that's really distracting. And on top of that, it doesn't make us connect as well to the characters. What you were doing before was great. We were connecting with the people because we were connecting with their culture, and their passion, and their beliefs, and their myths.
If I was driving, this never would have happened.
Oh, just stop
you never
it.
let me drive. You can't believe you totaled a mammoth.
That kind of takes us out of the magic. The kid he has to look after is really annoying. Again, you have to be really careful with a little boy who's trying to act tough because that can either turn out really annoying or really charming. This is really annoying. Surprisingly, at first, I was really getting into the music. Yeah, I thought it was sounding really nice. I saw that Phil Collins was attached to this and I dreaded it, but when I was hearing that opening music, you know what? I was really into it. But then... you just couldn't stay out of it, could you, Phil? Okay, well, maybe it'll just be like Tarzan, where he's kind of annoying, but he's not actually ruining anything. Oh, wow.
Anything within my power.
The bear is telling the cub what happened to the mother, and Phil Collins is singing over it.
I don't like this story.
You trusted me.
Oh, fuck you, Phil Collins! Fuck you! Or fuck the person who put the song here, or fuck the person who had the idea to put a song here, or write a song about it, just fuck somebody! This is the worst placement for a song ever. Guys, why couldn't you just go with a musical score here? I mean, really? You need Phil Collins to come in and sing? It's sad! This part is sad! You're supposed to cry right now! The bear is sad! Oh, look, he's really torn up! I'm not gonna let the scene just play! I'm gonna tell you how to feel! Oh, I'm Phil Collins! Fuck you! So yeah, the obvious plot that anybody can figure out, the modern talk, the Phil Collins songs, you'd really think I hate this movie. And, well, yeah, I do really hate parts of it, but damn it, those other parts are so good! I mean, talk about being so close and yet so far. Well, again, morally, I guess nothing bad is being said, and I guess it could be worse. I mean, they don't quote any movies or anything like that, at least not that I remember. But, oh, it was so close! You almost had this really perfect, wonderful Disney movie, and oh, Phil Collins, modern talk, pinky swear, oh, it frustrates me. But on the other hand, I guess I really didn't expect anything to come out of this movie, and to have the good parts that did come out of it, I guess that was pretty cool. And you know what? It is nice to see that Disney can still get some culture in their animated films. Now, whether or not the culture is correct, I don't know, because I myself am uncultured. But even if it's not, it still makes for interesting myth and interesting stories. So yeah, I love the beginning, I love the ending, the middle can suck it. Yeah, I realize this review is kind of all over the place, but that's really what I thought about it. Would I see it again? Probably not, but I guess I am glad that I did in fact see it once. Hopefully you can take what I said and also sort of look at the trailer and see if this is something that'd be up your alley. Well, either way, take a look at it and see for yourself. Let's get this over with. Home on the Range! Yes, okay. Out of all the Disney films I was gonna see for Disneycember, this is the one I wanted to see the least. And let me tell you folks, it didn't disappoint. It gave me exactly what I thought I was going to get. Oh God, do I hate this film. This is right up there with the Aristocats. Just no creativity, no spontaneity, no passion, no effort, just pure phoned-in-ness. I'll tell you the story because, really, you can figure out pretty quickly if you'll like this film or not. Roseanne is a cow. Well, I'd press stop after that fact, but let's keep going. She's just been sold to a farm with other cows, and everything is happy and chipper. They dance, they smile, But then they find out that the farm is being closed down. So the cows figure that if they bring this bandit to justice and get the reward money, they can use that to save the farm. And that's it. The rest is cows going after an evil villain. It's about as half-assed as you can imagine. Okay, now let me make one thing clear. When I say half-assed, I mean half-assed for Disney. I know animation is hard. I know that by most normal standards, this is still pretty good animation. And I know that by most bad films and even bad children's films considered, this isn't that horrendous. But if somebody told you that this was from the greatest animation company in the entire world, admit it, you'd be a little cheesed off too. You would want to see more effort from something that's so massive and so large. And this is a movie that's obviously just geared towards little kids. I mean really little kids, toddlers. The jokes aren't for adults, the writing isn't for adults, the characters aren't for adults, even the animation style isn't really for adults. And again, that was the magic with Disney. They hit both. They could hit both the kids and the adults, but here, no, it's just for kids. The only thing I remember remotely laughing at was Jennifer Tilly as this one cow. And to be honest, it's Jennifer Tilly. She's always funny. Aside from that, I remember so little. The songs are forgettable. The characters are forgettable. The obnoxiousness of how bright and colorful and smiley it is just, oh. It's like something out of Barney the Dinosaur or something. It just doesn't seem like Disney. Or maybe it does, but not updated Disney, not current Disney. Not the Disney that kept us coming back, wanting more. Not the passion, not the drive. Ugh, I don't even know what else to say about it. It's just bad. With a lot of these Disney films I was forced to watch this month, I came across a few surprises. Sadly, there was no surprise with this one at all. Unless you're only a few years old or younger, I say this is a definite skip. So I'm cheating a little bit with this one, as a lot of people do sort of consider this as an animated Disney flick. Well, okay, and maybe not consider it, but it's a satire of a Disney animated flick. Done by Disney Animation, so it's kind of hard not to talk about it. Enchanted starts off in a faraway land, an animated faraway land. There's a handsome prince, he has an evil mother, and he wants to marry a beautiful peasant. But the mother doesn't want them to marry and so banishes her to another kingdom. That is to say, our kingdom. The real world! Yes, isn't that gimmicky? She comes across a father and daughter in New York City who take pity on her and decide to take her in. She acts the way most of the leading females act from Disney animated films, or, well, more of the early ones. And it turns out she manages to bring a little magic into their lives. But then other people start to show up, including the dashing prince and the evil mother. The dashing prince, of course, is all smiles and heroics, while the mother is all evil and sorcery. And while spending time in the quote-unquote real world, they find that some of the ways they've been acting in their cartoony world doesn't seem very logical. For example, the peasant decides to ask the prince to go out on a date. They also discover that the stationary roles that they're so used to staying in don't have to be there all the time. A woman can be strong, a man can be weak, and so on and so forth. Okay, well you get the gist of it, so how's the movie? Well, it does have some good laughs in it, especially just from the performances. The peasant and the prince are especially funny. I mean, they just crack me up whenever they're on screen. And I do like the fact that as much as our world tries to force reality on them, their world can force their magic onto us. Like sometimes they'll break into song sequences, animals will suddenly be cleaning up, all that good stuff. I guess what bothers me a little bit is the fact that it is a Disney film, and that really what they're satirizing is more over the top than they give it credit for. I mean, number one, the films they're satirizing really are the films like Snow White and Cinderella. The more modern fairy tales don't quite go as this goofy. That is except for this one line, and this does make me laugh.
And you are?
Giselle.
Oh, Giselle! We shall be married in the morning.
That is spot on. But aside from that, the whole idea that the princesses always have to be damsels and that the princes always have to save the day, I don't know, it seems like with Beauty and the Beast and Mulan and Aladdin and stuff, they've mixed it up a bit. I mean, okay, it's not perfect and they do sometimes go back into those roles, but I think even Disney knows that they've come further than this movie is giving them credit for. On top of that, it works when they're playing it up for laughs, but the last third where Susan Sarandon is quoting every obvious stereotype, man, does that get annoying.
This is a twist on our story. It's the brave little princess. I guess that makes you the damsel in distress. We're coming to the end of our story now. And they all lived happily ever after. It's time to take our tale to new heights. Just dying to know how it ends.
Yes, we get it. Things are switched around. Ooh. See, in my opinion, when you really want change to happen, you just sort of do it. You don't draw a ton of attention to it. I guess I'm very much a by example person that way. Here, when you draw too much attention to it, it sort of feels like you're focusing on a stereotype that you may or may not have known existed. Like maybe you had a girl who was a tomboy and wasn't into princesses, and then you find out, oh, you were supposed to be this way, but now we're telling you it's okay. Or how about a boy who wasn't into fighting and rescues, but then you find out, oh no, this is what you're supposed to be. Except now we've given you permission not to be. Then again, maybe by drawing more attention to it, they feel like they're slapping the issue in the face, but I don't know, isn't the female lead holding a sword not really that shocking anymore? Isn't the fact that a guy has to be rescued once in a while not so risque? I wouldn't dwell on it so much except for the fact that the movie dwells on it so much! But let's be honest, what Enchanted really wanted to be was a romantic comedy. For kids, but mostly for adults. So in a sense, they overplayed the childish stereotypes because, well, it'll get a bigger laugh out of the adults, because that's what they remember growing up with, Snow White, Cinderella, and so forth. I guess I just get a little nervous thinking that this could possibly be a kid's first Disney movie, when obviously it's satirizing Disney movies, and even then, not phenomenally well. I mean, it's funny, but more for the characters they create, not for the ones they're satirizing. So kind of a mixed bag, but I find I do enjoy it. And when we get down to it, I guess it is harmless enough. But what would this mean for Disney? Would this mean that the 2D animation studio is back after such a long and horrible hiatus? Well, we'll find out in the next one. For a while, the Disney 2D animation studio was shut down. This is because the last few movies that were made were not huge financial successes. Half of them were even critical successes. So after a long time away, Disney decided to finally return to its roots. Go back to the fairy tales, go back to the happily ever afters, go back to the magical stuff. This is where The Princess and the Frog comes in. Let me tell you, I was excited to see an animated 2D Disney film on the big screen again. And not just a satire one, I mean a real one. And personally, in my opinion, it didn't disappoint. Okay, story. You got a young woman named Tiana. She has a dream of opening her own restaurant. After her father passes away, I guess some Disney traditions never do truly die, she works her butt off to save as much money as she can. While that's going on, a prince from a faraway land named Prince Naveen comes into town. His parents cut off his finances because he's too much of a party animal, but then he comes across the Shadow Man. He tricks Naveen into having him agree to have his soul be put into a frog, while his assistant would take on the appearance of the prince and also work for the Shadow Man. At a costume party, Naveen confuses Tiana for a princess and asks her to kiss him. She agrees, hoping that his riches will help keep her restaurant open, but seeing how she wasn't a true princess, she gets turned into a frog too. And the rest of the movie is them trying to figure out how to lift the curse and how to stop the evil Shadow Man. Let's look at our characters. Tiana is probably the best female lead since Belle. She's a fast thinker, she's positive, and she's a workaholic. God, never thought you'd see that in a Disney princess, would ya? The prince is also a lot of fun. He's full of himself, but he's also got a lot of innocence to him. Tiana's best friend is fucking hilarious. I haven't seen a Disney character this funny in a long time.
Oh, I need the bee's knees. Oh, tell her what you did, Big Daddy. Tell her.
Every second she is on screen, she just cracks me up. The villain is also a lot of fun. The fact that he's into voodoo allows for a lot of creative visuals and a lot of great possibilities, and they take advantage of them all. And the rest of the side characters are also very memorable. You got an alligator who wants to be a musician, a redneck firefly who thinks he's in love with a star in the sky, and a witch doctor who always has the answer to every question. So, okay, this film sounds about as good as the classic traditional great Disney movies. What could possibly go wrong with it? Well, there's only one problem with the movie, and sadly, it's kind of a big one. The story. It's not that it's bad, it's just a little too complicated. I mean, okay, I told you the basics, but I didn't even tell you about the fact that, the Shadow Man has a deal with the underworld so that he can take control of the town. But in order to take control of the town, he has to have the guy who looks like the prince marry the daughter of the mayor of the town. But in order to do that, they constantly need the blood of the frog prince to constantly give to that guy, or else his disguise will fade away. But it turns out the prince has to be kissed by the daughter of the mayor because the mayor always appoints himself the king of the parade, which technically makes her a princess, but that has to be done before midnight on this certain day. But on top of that, you also have to have the two main characters fall in love with each other while they're discovering how to fix their own faults as well as each other's. Oh, and did I mention that there's also a totally unnecessary death and a totally goofy, silly funeral scene that'll either make you laugh or cry or both? Oh my god, it's too much. I always said that this should have been called Loophole, the movie, because that's what it always seems like. Every second they're trying to look for a new loophole to get around something. Now, is it a major problem? I guess not, because you're constantly guessing what's gonna happen. But one of the charms of movies like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and so forth is that the stories were always very flowing. They knew exactly how much to give to the characters and exactly how much to give to the details. This movie has way too many details going on. But like I said, it's not that bad, it's just not as good as the other Disney flicks had it put together. Yes, the songs are Randy Newman's songs, and to be fair, two of them are pretty good. Friends on the Other Side is a great villain song. And Almost There actually has a very memorable, nice beat to it. The others, I don't remember them. And again, I guess that is a problem with the movie. But again, to the movie's credit, it does take place in New Orleans, and at least the musical style does match, even if it's not all memorable. I guess before I wrap up, I should talk about some of the controversy that surrounded this movie. Of course, Tiana was the first black princess, and there was a lot of talk about the fact that originally she was supposed to be a chambermaid. They changed it and made her a waitress, but that caused a lot of uproar too. Oh, it's changing history. Oh, it's changing the way things were back then. Well, you know what? There's a fucking talking frog. I think we'll live. Yeah, it's changing things, but you know what? We're always gonna have reminders of how things really were. This is a fairy tale. Let the kids have their fairy tale. On top of that, there's also controversy about why the film didn't do as well as Disney was hoping. Now, it didn't bomb, let me clarify that, but it wasn't the gigantic hit they were hoping for. Was it racism? Was the world just not ready for a black princess yet? I guess it could be, but I have my own theory. I think it is the prejudice, but it's not against black people. It's against hand-drawn films. It's been a while since one has been marketed to both adults and kids, and let's be honest, this is still a family picture. And the majority of family pictures coming out nowadays are either live action or 3D. Personally, I think a lot of adults still see hand-drawn films as kids' stuff. Now, it could get people in the seats if it was really doing something new like The Little Mermaid, or just did it spectacularly like Beauty and the Beast. And to be fair, even though I like this film, it really didn't. It updated the fairy tale very nicely and very cleverly, but the problems with the story do hold it back from being anything spectacular. And like I said before, only a few of the Randy Newman songs are memorable. There's no Be Our Guest in there. So that's my theory. But to be honest, it still made money. I'd be more concerned if nobody saw it. But you know what? People did. Was it a ton of them? No, but at the same time, a lot of the past Disney 2D animated films didn't have a ton of people looking at them, and nobody screamed racism at that. But I don't know all the people in the world, so it's anybody's guess. It's just a theory. On the whole though, I really enjoy this one. I felt just like I was seeing Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast again. It was great to see it on the big screen, it was great to see these characters, and I had a lot of fun watching it. The animation's great, the colors are great, the characters are great. I enjoyed watching it, and I know I'll be seeing it a few more times in the future. The other animated Disney flick that I'm sort of gonna cheat on, Tangled. I know technically it's a 3D animated movie, but let's be honest, it's a 2D film in 3D's clothing. The characters are designed like 2D animation, the backgrounds look like something out of 2D animation, the story is very reminiscent of the traditional Disney fairy tales, it's basically a 2D animated flick. So I'll bend the rules a little bit and review this one as well. And I also feel it a little bit necessary to compare it to the last 2D animated film, The Princess and the Frog. I know that's probably not fair to the movie, but at the same time, one film only did okay and one film did a lot better. And this was the one that did a lot better. And seeing how they came out back to back, I guess it does make sense to see why one did better than the other. So let's talk about the absolute best aspect of the film, the story. And it's rare that I say that, but the story to this film is brilliant. This is the classic retelling of a fairy tale that Disney used to do best. It's not exactly like the original, but the changes are not only incredibly creative, but half the time, they're improvements. It transitions the story into film perfectly. Okay, so what is it? Apparently there's this magic flower that gives eternal youth. But it only seems to do it when you sing a certain song that this witch figured out. So the witch has been using the flower for years, that is until the queen of the land gets incredibly sick. So the flower is found and used to keep her alive, but the witch loses her ability to keep young. It seems the flower has been crushed down to herbs and has now been passed on to the queen's daughter, Rapunzel. And the quote-unquote flower power actually seems to be in her hair. So the witch kidnaps Rapunzel when she's just a baby and uses the power of her hair to grow younger. And seeing how she wants to live longer and longer, she grows the hair longer and longer. All throughout this introduction, I was shouting, brilliant, 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 this is a fantastic setup! There's a reason for the hair to grow long, there's a reason for her to be in a tower, there's a reason to incorporate music into this, it was just wonderful! And on top of that, the setup for the rest of the story is actually pretty good too. Rapunzel grows up into a teenager, of course, under the care of her controlling witch mother. But when a famous thief enters her tower, she knocks him out and tries to get some information out of him. He agrees that if she lets him go, he'll lead her to this ceremony that seems to take place every year on her birthday. This ceremony, it turns out, is raising a bunch of lanterns in the hope that someday she will find it and return back home. She agrees, and from here on in, it's pretty much the adventure you think it'd be. There's sword fighting, horse riding, dancing, singing, romances, evildoers, all the stuff you'd expect from Disney. So, just from that ingenious setup, you'd expect this to be maybe one of the top 5 Disney films of all time, right? Well, there are some problems. One is the voice acting. And don't get me wrong, it's not terrible, it's not even that bad, I just can't find myself getting that invested in these voices. As soon as I heard Rapunzel's voice, I remember thinking to myself, oh, that's a celebrity voice. And wouldn't you know it, it was. And as soon as I heard the thief's voice, I remember thinking, hey, that sounds like a guy trying to do a thief's voice, but not actually a thief. And that's my major problem with this movie. As brilliant as the setup is, everything feels like they're trying to convey that traditional Disney film. Sometimes it works, but other times, much like Hunchback, it feels pretty forced. Like the musical segments, they just sort of come out of nowhere. They feel very rushed, and I don't feel like it really matches the movie. I mean, granted, I'm not a big fan of Randy Newman, but it matched in The Princess and the Frog. It was New Orleans, it made sense to have that kind of music. Here, this sort of pop guitar / Broadway / billboards hit sound, I don't know, it seems a little out of place. And honestly, those two things are my only problem, but they're kind of a big problem. Princess and the Frog, it was the story and everything else is fine. This, the story's great, but everything else seems kind of done. Now don't get me wrong, there are some real standout moments. In fact, I'll tell you my two favorites. One is the horse. This is one of the great movie horses. He's like the Javert of horses. It's just a great character. I could watch this thing forever. He just cracks me up. The other is the animation on the parents. Now that's really interesting because they never have a line in this movie. But holy smokes, look at the reaction on their faces. Look how torn apart they are. That is some of the best emotion I've ever seen in any animation, and it's all done without words. But still, that doesn't make up for the two main characters. And as I said before, they're not bad, they're well written, and they look great. I honestly just think it's the voice work. And even then, it's not horrible, I'm just always aware I'm hearing somebody behind a microphone. I'm always hearing somebody acting, I'm always hearing somebody put on a performance. And when you're constantly hearing that, you can't get as invested. So why did this film do a lot better as opposed to the last film about a princess and the Princess and the Frog? Is it a race issue? It could be. Is it because there's more guitar playing pop songs that can appeal to the general public more than ragtime New Orleans sound? That's possible too. But again, I think it comes back to my original theory. 3D animation. I think the film did well because the advertising played up that there was gonna be more adult jokes, even though there weren't that many. The fact that the story, to its credit, was a lot more simpler than Princess and the Frog. And, like I said, the fact that it's 3D animation makes adults think that it's gonna be made for them too. So do I like it? Sure, it's a good flick. While the voice acting is distracting, it doesn't destroy the film. I mean, I'm with it enough. The backgrounds still look nice, there's a few genuine soft moments. The side characters are fun, and like I said, it's a great story. I guess for me, I just like the updates to the Disney formula in The Princess and the Frog more than I like the updates in Tangled. Somewhere there's a brilliant Disney movie here. If we took the story of Tangled and the animation and characters of Princess and the Frog, we could get something as brilliant as Beauty and the Beast. It's in there, I know it. But still, if you're looking for a good adventure that also has that fairy tale edge to it, Tangled's not a bad rent. Check it out and see what you can get wrapped up in. Come to the last animated film in Disneycember, Winnie the Pooh. Wait, didn't we already do Winnie the Pooh? Oh, wait, no, that was The Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. This is just Winnie the Pooh. Like, what, this is his biography or something? Or is it a reboot? Like a retelling of the original movie? No, they're new stories. I guess it's just sort of continuing it, but why don't they call it More Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, or The Continuing Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, or give it a different title like they did the other Winnie the Pooh movies? I don't know. It's here, let's review it. All your favorite characters are back, including Winnie, Piglet, Owl, Tigger, the whole bunch. And much like the original film, it doesn't seem like there's one coherent story throughout the whole thing. Well, kind of, sort of, not really, yes, I don't know. Okay, let me explain. Pooh is looking for honey, big shock. And in the meantime, he finds out that Eeyore has lost his tail. Pooh tells everybody about it, and so everybody tries to get a replacement tail for him. But none of them really seem to work. So they sort of leave that story for a bit, and they go on to another story. Pooh tries to approach Christopher Robin, but he misreads a note and thinks that he's been kidnapped by a monster called the Baxen. I won't dare tell you as how they came to this conclusion because, to be very honest, it's very, very funny. So most of the movie is trying to figure out how to capture this monster called the Baxen. And that's really about it. Those are the only two stories in this movie. I mean, it's done well, I guess, but why do we spend so much time on just those two stories? The original had like a ton of stories, and that was awesome. Heck, even if you wanted to keep it to just one story, that'd be fine too, but these seem very split apart, and even the way the movie is told, it seems like it's trying to recreate what the first film was doing. You know, a lot of fourth wall jokes with the narrator, and just sort of taking time to let the characters talk and breathe and just have moments. But what made that one work is that it had a lot of stories. This one only has two. That's very odd. When the film ended, I was shocked. I was like, really? That's it? Where's the rest of it? There's gotta be more stories you can tell than that. But to be fair, they're told pretty well. As I said before, the film does recreate sort of that feel that the first movie did, though just like I said, too few stories. but it still has a pretty good atmosphere and pace to it. John Cleese is the narrator, and he's absolutely perfect. He's both dignified, but can also sort of give that sense of humor that the original narrator had too. That's Craig Ferguson as the owl, and he's a little different from the original character. He's a little bit more obsessed, a little bit more full of himself. I mean, the original owl was kind of egotistical too, but this one seems obsessed with being right. Which I guess works okay, but I don't know, wasn't Rabbit already sort of that character? Wasn't he kind of the stick in the mud or whatever? I don't know, it works okay. The songs are really friggin' good songs. I guess it was done by the same people who did Avenue Q and Book of Mormon. In fact, one of the writers is actually the voice of Kanga. That's pretty cool. They're so good that I actually thought maybe it was the Sherman Brothers. I thought they came back to do the music for this movie. But nope, it's just the exact same spirit and the exact same talent. I guess if I had to point out one other nitpick, it would be, surprisingly, the animation's a little too good. I know, I'm never satisfied, but when you look at the original Winnie the Pooh, it's just the perfect amount. It's good animation, but still a little sketchy. Here, the backgrounds are still sketchy and they look fine, but the characters may be just a little too clean. And on top of that, they sort of gave Christopher Robin more human-like eyes, and oddly enough, I sort of like the dot eyes, which I rarely do. But I think because everybody else has them, it sort of worked. And when you suddenly see a character that has those big Disney-like eyes, it sort of takes you out of it a bit. Though not much. And again, it's a nitpick. I'm just trying to look for problems. The film is good. It has a lot of funny scenes. The characters are still wonderful, and it has some great songs. The biggest problem there is that there are only 2 stories, and I still don't get that. Why didn't they do a ton of stories, especially when it's called Winnie the Pooh? I mean, you can recreate this, you can have so much fun, and you only stick it to 2 stories? Well, to be fair though, they're good stories, along with good characters, good songs, and everything else I mentioned before. It's not a great flick, but it's a good one. If you're a fan of Winnie the Pooh, especially the original, I'd say go ahead and check it out. And folks, that was Disneycember. Thank you so much for joining me and looking over some of the most classic and memorable of Disney animated movies. I'm sure you got your own opinions on these movies, so get out there, share them, and hear what other people have to say. Thanks so much for joining me, and take care. By popular demand, a Goofy movie. This is a film I actually already talked about a bit. I did a list of the top Nostalgia Critics I wouldn't review, and one of them was a Goofy movie. I wasn't really sure why so many people wanted me to review this. I will say that, in a sense, I was the exact wrong age to see this when it came out. I think I was just starting to enter high school, and when you're starting to enter high school, you don't want to see a Disney film with Goofy in it. So keep in mind, I didn't grow up with this, I actually saw it years later. But, for what I saw, I didn't think it was that bad. I mean, okay, it's not among one of the best Disney films or anything, but you know what? For what I could have gotten, I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised. The story is Max, now played by a different voice actor, is forced to go on a field trip with his father, Goofy. The only downside is all his friends are going to a concert, and even a possible girlfriend named Roxanne might be there as well. So while on the trip, he's constantly trying to find a way to steer the car towards the concert, instead of on the fishing trip that his father wants to go on. So yeah, kind of a standard story, but what really sets it apart, oddly enough, is the connection between the father and the son. The father just wants to be a part of his son's life, and the son, of course, wants his independence. This could easily be shown through a bunch of throwaway lines, and yeah, they're in there too. But actually, there's a lot of quiet, and dare I even say it, kind of mature moments in this movie. I mean, it never goes too far, it always comes back to the fact that it's a funny cartoon. But for example, look at this opening. Artistically, this is a very nicely laid out movie. And I mean, think about it, you're doing Goof Troop the movie. Would you expect any of this to be in it? In fact, it's actually kind of cool to see Disney animate some modern day technologies. Like, when's the last time you saw a hot tub in a Disney film? And really, they don't take their gloves off even when they go swimming? Cartoons are weird. I will say one of the downsides is that there's very little of Pete's family, and that was always my favorite part of the show. We don't even see the wife, the crazy daughter, or the dog, and I really missed them. They were funny. But to be fair, that's not the movie's focus. It really is supposed to be about the father and son, and they keep it where it should be. The songs I don't remember too well, with the exception of the opening one. I have to admit, it is pretty catchy. The song done by the pop star at the concert is also pretty enjoyable. but mostly for awkward corniness. Scenes like this and even a played down Pauly Shore actually work okay in the movie in the same way that Zach Morris works in Saved by the Bell. Yeah, you know it's not really popular, but you know what? You give it a pass. It's cute, it's energized. The characters are having a lot of fun in it. The romance actually isn't that bad either. The Roxanne character is actually kind of cute and likable, and the two of them actually do share a believable chemistry. Though I don't know, has the shy, stuttering guy in the corner really ever gotten the hot girl? Well, I'll tell you, no it hasn't! But a Goofy movie is a very fun film. It's bright and colorful, it's got good stuff for kids, and it's got a couple of good things for adults as well. The jokes are pretty clever, the characters are pretty likable. It's no masterpiece, but I think it's definitely worth a look. By popular demand, let's talk about Dinosaur. This is the one, for whatever reason, everybody's been pleading for me to do, even though it technically isn't a 2D animated film. My guess was that the film must be so good that obviously everybody wants me to review it. Okay. I didn't quite see it as that, but, alright, let's start from the beginning. And I mean really from the beginning. Let's go to the trailer, because this is the first thing a lot of people saw. The trailer was just the first 5 minutes of the movie, with a little dinosaur egg being picked up and traveling across fields of real-life landscape and computer-generated dinosaurs. And I gotta admit, it was pretty cool. It got a lot of us really hyped up. But then when a lot of people saw the movie, their reaction was kinda similar.
Yar, what is it?
Wah! They talk? Damn it! I thought they were really gonna do something new with like the animals that don't talk, sort of like in Fantasia, or do this really adult story, but okay, oh well. You know what? Maybe it'll be like Land Before Time, you know, where it's this really big story and really touching characters and just this timeless...
What you need is a little help from the Love Monkey.
Love Monkey, huh?
Come on, hot stuff. Let's get going.
Okay, which celebrity is that?
Girls, I'm known as the Professor of Love.
Professor? Really? They had professors in the dinosaur age? Yeah, I know I'm probably overreading it, but for God's sakes, look at this opening! Look at how real they try to make these dinosaurs! They're obviously trying to tell this really, really big story, and I'm sorry, you can't do it with these voices and these references. If it was something like out of a Rudyard Kipling novel, maybe, but...
The Love Monkey.
Oh, stop saying that! The story, you've heard it a million times. It's Moses again. A young one is driven from his family to be raised by somebody else. Years later, he grows up, but finds something threatens his kind, in this case, a meteorite. So he finally comes across his people, and wouldn't you know it, he emerges a leader. Again, I'm willing to put up with this if they give us something new, but these characters are so bland and so tired. The minute you see the main character, you know what he's gonna be. He's gonna be naive, but determined. A wisecracker, but knows when to be serious. The all-around good role model who cracks a few jokes every now and then. What about the supporting characters? You have the female love interest, who is just there to be the female love interest. Yeah, they talk twice, and all of a sudden they're like laying eggs at the end. When did that happen? The jerky leader is the jerky leader. Oh, wait, actually, we have two jerky leaders, so that way we can do both story arcs. The one with the guy who realizes his mistakes, and the one with the stubborn jerk who never catches on. Well, great, you gave us two cliches for one. You got that weird thing I never get where some of the dinosaurs talk, but some don't. And you could argue maybe they're not as intelligent, but look, one of them's like a dog. I'm sorry, that's really weird. If it was like a different animal, maybe, but when all the rest of the dinosaurs can talk, this is really kind of odd. It's like talking to a person and then another person is suddenly licking and scratching at you. It's, I don't know, just odd. Even all that beautiful landscape we were promised in the trailer, most of it's just traded in for bland, boring-looking desert. And I know what they're getting across. They're supposed to be suffering, the meteor hit, it's supposed to be bad times. But when your story and your characters are as bland as this, the least you could do is give us something interesting to look at. Now, to the movie's credit, despite the fact that the story's been done a million times and these characters have been done a million times, it's not bad. I mean, there's a few things I like. For example, I really like these two older dinosaurs that are constantly bringing up the rear. They know they're slowing people down, but at the same time, they're trying their best to be optimistic and hopeful. The supportive mother, though again, done a million times, is actually a genuinely likable character too. And I do sort of like it when the one leader realizes his mistake, and is even ready to die for it. But for a story like this, where obviously they're trying to tell a great big tale with great big characters, none nothing much really stands out about it. Something like Land Before Time really works because not only is it done with dinosaurs, but it's done with young dinosaurs. And they don't use terms like the love monkey. They use terms that are a little bit more timeless. And you feel the pain and the struggle they have to get through because they're much younger. That makes the danger so much more greater. And they all had unique personalities, and you could easily gravitate towards them. You could get angry at them, or you could get sad for them, or you could get happy for them. Why is it I always praise this movie whenever I'm talking about Disney films? So yeah, I hear the film didn't do phenomenally well at the box office, and you can probably see why. But again, a lot of people really want me to do this, so I guess a lot of people out there probably really enjoy it. And if you do, that's awesome. Like I said, I don't think there's anything ethically wrong or really insulting about it. It just seems like a really been done story, as well as really been done characters. And I know that there's about 5 original stories that we're all doing variations on, and like 10 original characters that we're only doing variations on, but the more they can hide it or at least bring something new to the table, that's what makes a difference. And for me, I just didn't feel this brought enough. I didn't hate it, I just couldn't get into it. But hey, apparently a lot of people did, and I'm sure a lot of people still do. If you're interested to see what some people are talking about, give it a watch. But if the same things that annoy me also annoy you, I'd probably say give it a skip. Popular demand, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? A lot of people have been asking me to do this film, and I guess I can sort of see why. It is technically Disney animation, even though it's mixed with live action. It had groundbreaking technology, and it was the first time you saw characters like Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny together. That's still so surreal to me. I'll spell the story real quick for all, 2 of you that don't know it. Eddie Valiant, played by Bob Hoskins, is a detective in Hollywood. Apparently, a very wealthy prankster named Marvin Acme has been murdered by a toon. Eddie doesn't mind too much seeing how he has this incredible prejudice against toons. Why? Because a toon killed his brother. How?
Dropped the piano on his head.
That is hilariously tragic. Everybody thinks Roger Rabbit is to blame, and so he goes to Eddie Valiant to try and solve the case. Despite his prejudice, he does believe that the rabbit is innocent. And so, with the help of the characters from Toontown, including Roger's saucy hot wife named Jessica, they set out to solve the mystery. I'm trying to think what I can say about this film that everybody else hasn't already. Everybody's seen it, everybody loves it. In fact, they more than love it, they go crazy for it. So okay, let's talk about why people go crazy for this film, because to be honest, I never quite understood. I mean, don't get me wrong, I go crazy for it too, I am in love with this movie. But I mean, everybody in the world seems to like this film, even the biggest sourpusses. Is it the story? I guess, but I don't know. It's not really much of a mystery. I mean, take a guess who the bad guy is. No, really, come on, take a wild guess. Is it the characters? Well, yeah, they're pretty good too, but again, nothing really groundbreaking. We've seen characters with prejudices before and they go through a story arc that changes them back. Is it how technically groundbreaking it is? I suppose, but there's a lot of technological groundbreaking movies that people don't go gaga for like they do with this movie. Even the idea of live-action actors interacting with cartoons is not a new idea. It's been done almost since the beginning of animation. So really, what's the secret formula that everybody can identify with? Well, I thought about why I like the movie. I mean, sure, the story and characters are great, but what is it I love about it now that I love just as much as when I was a kid? And then it hit me. This is the movie I always wanted to see as a kid. The film's very clever in not taking modern-day cartoons, but rather the timeless cartoons that everybody grew up with. They're the characters that fill up the screen. And like I said before, it's not just Disney characters, it's Warner Brothers characters, Paramount characters. It runs the gamut. And I can guarantee you, everybody that has ever grown up watching cartoons has envisioned this. Imagining a film or a story where every single one of their favorite cartoon characters come together. And that's what this movie did. It brought everybody's childhood fantasy to life. It made these cartoon characters that we grew up with real. It treated them with the same dedication and love that we felt every single time we watched them. You don't see a modern day manipulation of Bugs Bunny, you see Bugs Bunny. You don't see a writer trying to recreate Mickey Mouse, you see Mickey Mouse. And because it was set in the past, everybody knows these characters and absolutely loves them. And because of the technology they have, they seem more real than ever. Add a good story, some scary moments, funny moments, dramatic moments, romantic moments. Top it off with some great writers and a good director who put all their time and energy into making these characters seem just as real, alive, and believable to us now as they were when we were children. And you have a movie that captures all the zaniness, all the goofiness, and all the joy that we felt as children watching these cartoons. Quite honestly, it's a perfectly written love letter to our childhoods.